Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku had Primordial Kaonashi Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Kaonashi wearing a cowl and a no-face mask, his usual two vigilante face coverings. Quick footsteps crunch on frozen leaves and snow as 8-year-old Midoriya Izuku stumbled through a forest in the dead of winter. He had managed to escape the spirit world after nearly 3 years of being forced to serve a trickster god. He tripped on a branch and fell when he heard yokai howling and jeering close to him. He had no idea whether they were searching for him or not, but he wasn't taking any chances. Sitting up, he pulled off his backpack, taking out one of the talismans he had stolen before escaping and writing air on it with stiff fingers before pinning it to his shirt. He activated his quirk, his glowing eyes reflecting on the snow around him. The yokai gradually quieted down as he continued through the forest, stopping to look up at the stars on occasion as they guided him towards a shelter. He reached a broken-down shrine. His quirk told him the shrine was unclaimed, so he pushed the torn shoji open. It was marginally warmer inside, with broken windows and floorboards. He stepped carefully, walking into the first room and finding what he assumed would be a bedroom if it had furniture. There was an old sheet crumpled up on the ground, which he immediately snatched up and wrapped around himself. The next room was a kitchen that had a cushioned mat on the ground. He dragged the mat with him back into the bedroom, exhaustion finally winning its battle as he curled up on it and pulled the sheet over his head so just the upper half of his face was visible. Izuku shot up, wide awake, to someone screaming about an intruder. His muscles screamed at the sudden movement as he whipped his head around, trying to spot who was screaming. He zeroed in on a Ural owl staring at him, wings spread wide. "You're a spirit?" he questioned, studying her spiritual signature. He spoke in primordial tongue, a language that only spirits, yokai, and gods could hear and understand. "You're a human," she stated matter-of-factly, seeming surprised that he spoke in that language. "What's a child doing here alone?" "I ran away from the spirit world, and I don't have a family to go back to, so I found this place," he replied, looking down with a frown. The trickster god had killed his mother before taking him away. The owl jumped off the broken window she had been standing on, approaching the greenette. "I understand, my family died when I was still an infant. That's why I live here now." "Can I live here too, Miss Owl?" he asked, watching as she hopped on his knee. She blinked, studying him for a moment. "Of course, kid, but it isn't a very cozy home." He smiled at her. "That's okay, it's better than where I was. Thank you, Miss Owl. Call me Sakuya." "You can call me Izuku, then." He knew it would be safe to tell her his name, having become an expert on reading spiritual signatures. Sakuya was his first familiar since breaking his bond with the trickster god. The void he felt after abandoning the god and the other yokai was colder than midwinter without a jacket. He almost went back to him before correcting himself. 2 years after Izuku's reappearance into the living world, Aizawa Shoyuta pushed open the door that led to Tsukachi Naomesa's office. He had 2 cups of coffee and, while he would love to keep them both for himself, he was a nice person sometimes and placed one of them in front of Tsukachi. "What was that cryptic message about an unknown vigilante?" he asked tiredly, sitting down across from his friend. Tsukachi picked up the coffee mug, taking a sip before setting it next to his other coffee mug. "The vigilante is just as cryptic, I just wanted to convey that through a text message," he replied, sighing and pulling out a folder from his desk drawer. "The vigilante has been at large for 4 months and hasn't revealed any kind of name, so we've just been calling them number 17 for how many active vigilantes we have in the Shizuoka prefecture. I've been on their case for the past 3.5 months, but we haven't been having any luck even spotting the vigilante." Aizawa hummed, taking the folder and opening it up. He raised his eyebrows at the fact that there were 6 quirks listed. It was usually easier to pinpoint a quirk than that. Heightened senses, speed, teleportation, telekinesis, fire breathing, and animal taming or telepathy. Most of these aren't even related to each other. I've been taking notes of everyone who has encountered the vigilante so far. The criminals and villains all gave different quirks when describing them, and the victims they have saved haven't revealed anything aside from the fact that number 17 uses sign language and has never spoken before. He explained as Aizawa looked at the interrogations and interviews. "And you're bringing me on this case because you've never seen them?" he asked, closing the folder and slipping it into his capture scarf. Tsukachi nodded. "You're the number 1 underground hero and one of the most skilled capture heroes we have here. If anyone can catch this vigilante, it's you." He sighed but relented. "I haven't been on a vigilante case in a while, might as well." "Thanks, Zawa, I appreciate the help." He grunted, standing up. I'm not guaranteeing anything. If your team hasn't even seen them, I doubt I'll have any better luck. Aizawa stared at the new interviews about the vigilante in frustration. It had been 3 months since he accepted the case, and he couldn't pinpoint any kind of patrol route or clues on their actual quirk. He suspected that they were using a lot of expensive support equipment that replicated quirks. The newer interviews had started calling him Kaonashi, or No Face, because of the multiple quirks, that they were always dressed in black, and was thought to have no physical body because of how silent they were when walking and fighting. It was better than calling them number 17, he'll give them that. Kaonashi would patrol basically every single night, based on the arrests the police were making and the statements given by the villains and victims. How this person had that much free time and energy was a mystery to him. He patrolled 5 days a week and was constantly exhausted, even without school in session. Another interesting thing he learned from the interviews was the fact that they knew the vigilante was near because of the appearance of twin black cats and sometimes an owl. The animals were just as elusive as the vigilante, never letting anyone touch or get near them. They had been with the vigilante since they first started. He set the folder on the desk in his office before retreating to his bedroom and sliding into bed next to Hisashi, who had been asleep for the past 3 hours he'd been awake. 5 months later? Izuku sprinted across rooftops, guided by the Nakomata twins. He had made his familiars when he was Takeo and Kitaro, the twin black cats, were experts at finding trouble for him to take care of. Tonight was no different as he heard Takeo yowl just as he heard the sounds of a scuffle. He stopped at the edge of the roof, looking down and finding 2 people in the middle of a fight. It looked like an attempted mugging, and the victim wasn't giving in. The victim seemed to be searching for something while defending against the attacks. He silently dropped into the alleyway, using his mother's telekinesis to slow his descent. He pulled the baseball bat he found at Takoba Beach off his back. He tapped the bat against the wall, causing the mugger to freeze and whip around. He had a pocket knife that he wasn't holding very securely. It didn't seem like he was actually expecting a fight even though he still charged Izuku while yelling obscenities. He ripped the knife out of his hand using telekinesis before easily whacking him over the head with the bat. He went down right away, out cold. Izuku glanced over to the victim, who was looking at him with stars in his eyes. "Why, you're Kaonashi-san, right?" They stammered out, taking a couple steps towards him. He tilted his head. "Who was Kaonashi?" "I don't have a name," he signed back, wondering if this person knew sign or not. "Oh, well, I don't think you gave a name before, so everyone who has met you decided to name you," he replied, stopping his approach when Izuku took a small step back. "You're really helping a lot of people with what you do, keep it up." "I don't do this for the recognition, but thank you." He gave a small bow to the man before turning and scaling the alley wall back to the roof. It was near the end of his patrol, so he found a secluded alleyway before pulling off his hoodie and mask. He jogged over to a 24/7 cyber cafe that he went to on occasion. He logged into one of the computers and pulled up some online forums, researching the name Kaonashi. It didn't take too much scrolling around to find a forum dedicated to Kaonashi, the Silent Sentinel. It was filled with fans and watchers dedicated to spotting him. The posts on the forum were thank you letters, theories on his quirk and identity, and maps of where he has saved people at. Much to his surprise, there were 2 photos and 1 video of him. One of the photos was blurry and the other was of Takeo and Kitaro. The video was from the perspective of the guy he saved from the mugger before that was posted barely 20 minutes ago. He was just a silhouette because of the streetlights behind him, but it still showed him knocking out the villain with the bat before it turned off when he looked over at him. He closed out the forum and logged off the computer. He wasn't particularly worried about people getting photos and videos of him, considering he was legally dead and previously diagnosed as quirkless. His mother actually made him go to a psychiatrist when he first told her about the yokai he saw, not believing it to be real. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, he left the cafe to return to the shrine. It was a few weeks later and winter was in full swing. Snow lightly powdered the ground as he hopped across roofs, listening for the Nakomata to alert him. He stopped when Kitaro ran over to him. "There's a fight close by," he explained, turning to lead Izuku that way. "Takeo is fighting the yokai surrounding the alleyway, but it's a drag deal fight." Sounded like the buyers started pushing for a lower price and the sellers didn't like that. Izuku nodded. "Thanks, Kitaro-kun," he said in primordial tongue, slowing down when Kitaro stopped at the edge of a roof. Leaning over the edge, he was surprised to find a third party had joined the battle. It was a singular person taking on both groups and winning with ease. He studied what the lone person was wearing, a thick gray scarf that he was using as a weapon, yellow goggles, and all black with long hair. If he wasn't mistaken, this man was a hero that only patrolled at night. Eraserhead, he thinks? Feeling a small twist of anxiety about being spotted, He touched the talisman earrings he was wearing, activating them. Both talismans burned up as his presence was concealed, making him feel more comfortable about watching the fight. The two gangs didn't stand a chance. Eraserhead took them out within a few minutes before calling the police to collect them. Izuku blinked in surprise when Eraserhead looked up at the roof he was perched on. Did he notice him? No. He glanced at Kitaro and saw that Takeo had joined them. The hero had noticed his familiars, not him. Let's leave before he pursues. He told the Nakomata, who immediately turned and bolted, Izuku following close behind. They returned to the shrine not long later, calling a greeting to Sakuya. Welcome home. The owl said warmly, picking up a bag of chips and flying over to land on Izuku's shoulder. I grabbed some food for you while I was out. Thank you, Sakuya-chan. He said gratefully. Food was always scarce for him. He didn't have a solid income and didn't have any luck getting a job as a 11-year-old. The best he could do was steal food whenever possible or go to the homeless shelter where he found his vigilante outfit and other clothes and toiletries. He dug into the chips greedily. It would probably be in his best interests to reduce how often he patrols, considering he didn't have enough food to sustain himself even without the added exercise, but he didn't have to sleep as often as normal humans, so he would just end up bored. He glanced around the shrine. It was cleaned up and he had fixed what he could using things he found at Takoba Beach, glass shards that he held together using telekinesis before using his father's fire breathing to weld them into place for the broken windows, new paper for the shoji that he was lucky enough to find, a couple of kitchen appliances that ran on battery or solar, an old twin-sized futon and blankets, and a small box that he used as an offerings box for the 3 regular visitors he gets every month. He couldn't offer much more than talismans to them whenever they came by, but they seemed grateful. It wasn't much, but it was the best that he could manage given his age and wealth. Maybe he would have more luck with an online job or getting paid to do chores for neighborhoods. He finished the bag of chips before settling himself down on the futon, careful to not disturb the Nakomata who had gone to sleep as soon as they got back. Thanks, Mizuno-sama. Izuku bowed deeply to the old woman before pocketing the money she gave him for shoveling her snowy driveway. I'll come back next time it snows. Mizuno smiled at him. Thank you, dearie, you take care now. She waved at him as he ran off to the next house in the cul-de-sac. It was late January, and the winter had been heavy with snow, much to Izuku's financial benefit. He has found that people really hated shoveling their driveways, enough so that they're willing to spend a good 2,000 yen for 20 minutes of labor. He has consistently made at least 32,000 yen per week, multiplying that by 2 months, and he found himself with over 300,000 yen. Not too bad for a 12-year-old working maybe 6 hours a week. And what did the runaway child spend this 300,000 yen on? Aside from the essentials like new second-hand outfits, shrine repairs, food, and a giant cat bed for Takeo and Kitaro, he also bought some craft supplies to make his own mask that looked like No-Face from the pre-Quirk movie. The media named him after the spirit, so why not adopt the look? Izuku briskly walked through Southside to a shop he'd been eyeing for almost a year now. This would be his most expensive purchase yet, but hopefully the one that will be the most useful to him. A couple of bells above the door chimed as he went inside, glancing around cautiously before stepping up to the front desk. After a moment, someone walked out of the back room and approached him, immediately looking thrown off at seeing a child. He was known to the underground as Obsidian Barb. He had a porcupine mutation quirk and specialized in precision. Can I help you? He asked, tucking a few loose quills behind his ear. Izuku cleared his throat, knowing there was a 50-50 chance that he'd get turned away. I was wondering if I could see your prices? Obsidian narrowed his eyes. Are you here for someone else or yourself? For myself, sir. He replied, watching with relief as Obsidian reached under the desk and pulled out a small binder. You understand you have to pay extra for me to work on minors, right? He opened the binder to a specific page before turning it to Izuku, gesturing. As in, I double my prices because of the risk. He nodded in understanding, looking at the binder. Of course, I have the money for 2. You have a reference of what you're wanting, or do you want me to grab example pieces? Izuku quickly pulled out the burner phone he had bought a week prior, tapping on it before handing it to Obsidian. If you could get it as accurate as possible to these, they're related to my quirk. He hummed in curiosity, grabbing his phone and switching between the 2 photos. No problem, they aren't that complicated. Have a seat, I'll come and get you in a minute. Thank you, Obsidian-san. He gave a small bow before turning to the waiting area. He recently tried activating his quirk from a sigil he drew on his arm. It didn't work at first until Sakuya told him it needs his blood to work. Ever since then, he has been obsessed with the idea of getting quirk tattoos that he can activate at any time. He planned and sketched for months until he decided on one tattoo that would stockpile his spiritual energy over time, and the other would act as a barrier against yokai and gods when activated. The barrier was more powerful than his usual ward, which was especially useful with the enemies he had made from abandoning the trickster god and being a vigilante. Obsidian called him back after a bit and they went through the motions of tattoo prep. They would both be on his left forearm where he'd be able to easily slide his sleeve up to activate them. He was only there for around an hour thanks to Obsidian's skills and quirk. He was about to leave after paying 60,000 yen on the tattoos when an advertisement for the shop caught his eye. "When is Aku-san available?" he asked, looking back over at Obsidian. He hummed in thought. "He's usually in when we first open on weekdays, but I could probably call him in now." Izuku smiled and nodded in agreement. "Thank you, Obsidian-san. Go take a seat, I'll let you know when Aku can see you." Only a few minutes later, he glanced over at the front door when it chimed. A guy with a ton of piercings walked in and looked at him. "Midoriya-san?" he asked and Izuku nodded. "I'm Aku, come on back and we can talk about what you want." That was fast. Were there apartments upstairs? He also didn't seem as surprised at seeing that he was a kid as Obsidian did, so he assumed that he was already told about it beforehand. Izuku sat down at a chair in a small medical-style office. "All right, what were you wanting to have done?" "I can change the structure of any bone, but the cost depends on which bone it is. I just want my canines to be a bit longer and sharper. How much would that cost?" That would make it easier to use the sigils. He'd just have to bite his thumb instead of taking out a needle or knife every time. That's a pretty simple and quick process. "I'll charge 25,000 per tooth, so 50,000 total," he said, grabbing a couple medical gloves. "Go ahead and show me your teeth." With 2 gentle pokes and a sting, Izuku was handed a mirror to check out his new teeth. They didn't stand out unless you were paying attention, but he could tell they were sharp with a swipe of his tongue. "This is perfect. Thanks, Aku-san," he said, pulling out his wallet and handing him 5 bills. "Have a good one, come back if you're having any problems with them. I'll do one free touch-up in the first 6 months," he explained, showing Izuku the way out. He left the shop 110,000 yen lighter, but with 2 new modifications for his quirk's benefit. Izuku stretched and yawned. It was midnight on a slightly chilly night in late March. His tattoos were fully healed and worked when he tested them out, though he found that he had to use the energy stockpiling one around once a week or it would start burning him from the energy buildup. His Kaonashi mask was also finished and he only got annoyed by it after the first half of his patrol, which was when he'd take his break anyways. Takeo yowled in a way that had Izuku sprinting across rooftops at top speed. He would always yowl to alert him of a crime in action, but he never sounded that frantic unless it was life or death. He skidded to a stop next to Kitaro, watching as Takeo chased after 2 yokai. "What's happening?" he asked, looking into the alleyway and seeing a group of 8 obviously drunk guys surrounding 3 others. 2 were civilians that were unconscious on the ground, and the other was Eraserhead. "Quirk discrimination. They've been yelling about villainous quirks since Takeo found them," Kitaro explained shortly before turning to assist his brother. He crouched down on the edge of the roof, listening in on the conversations happening. "It doesn't matter that you're a pro hero," one of the drunk guys was yelling, brandishing a steel pipe. "Your quirk still makes you a villain." He didn't understand why Eraserhead wasn't attacking them at first, then realized that 3 of the villains still had their sights on the 2 unconscious civilians. He was putting himself at risk to keep them safe. Did he call for backup already and was buying time? He watched the hero swiftly knock 2 of the villains out with his capture weapon, then dodge away from the first guy's pipe. Izuku double-checked his weapons as he watched Eraser take down another villain. He had an old fishing net, some rope, a baseball bat, and some old can lids he uses like frisbee boomerangs. He cringed when Eraserhead jumped in front of the civilians, taking a hard kick against the chest in the process before the main villain swung the steel pipe, whacking him across the side of his head. The hero was thrown against the wall right after and slumped to the ground. Time to intervene, he thought, equipping the fishing net and launching it at the 2 villains responsible for taking down Eraser. He used his telekinesis to twist the net around their necks before yanking them hard against the alley wall, knocking them out. The remaining 3 were turning in circles, trying to find who threw the net. He jumped off the roof, slowing himself down just enough to not kill anyone before landing hard on one of their shoulders and pushing off. He wrapped the rope securely around the villain's wrists and flung him at the other 2, bowling them over. He made the rope tie the 3 of them together and to the dumpster, quickly smacking each of them with his bat to ensure they wouldn't escape. He took a few steadying breaths as he checked on the 2 civilians, confirming that they were fine before turning to Eraser. He pulled off his Kaonashi mask, making sure the cowl was still in place as he walked over. He knelt down in front of the unconscious hero, pressing 2 fingers to the side of his neck. He still had a pulse, but considering he still wasn't awake meant at least a concussion if not worse. Reckless hero. He muttered in primordial tongue, touching the side of his head and seeing his fingers come back red. Izuku pressed his whole hand against the side of Eraser's head, finding the source of the bleeding before activating his quirk in his palm. He started transferring spiritual energy into the wound, accelerating the healing process and immediately feeling fatigued. From what he could tell, he wouldn't have to do too much healing before the hero would be fine. It only took around 30 seconds before he stirred and slowly blinked his eyes open. They were unfocused, but it shouldn't take long before he would be healed enough to just have a headache. It took a moment, but Eraserhead eventually realized that Izuku was sitting right in front of him. He almost laughed when the hero glanced at the hand on the side of his head, then back at him with a mildly perplexed look on his face. He grabbed a pen light from his pocket and shined it in the hero's eyes, figuring he was healed enough before shutting off his quirk and leaning back. He picked up his discarded mask, securing it back into place and standing to give Eraser room. He watched his eyes widen at seeing the mask. "You're Kaonashi," he muttered, pushing himself up just as Izuku turned and scaled the wall to get to the roof. He activated his talisman earrings before moving back to the edge of the roof to wait for the police to arrive. Eraserhead was still looking towards where he'd disappeared at, which was a few meters to his left, before shaking his head and checking on the civilians who had woken up at this point. Takeo and Kitaro returned to him after a minute, and they left when they heard police sirens heading towards the scene. Aizawa POV. The alleyway fight against the drunk quirkists was far from ideal. He had arrived just as the 2 victims of the discrimination were hit with some kind of drag that knocked them out. He barely had time to send an emergency alert before jumping into the fight. It went downhill from there as some of them were trying to distract him by attacking the unconscious civilians, forcing him to stay on the defense. He heard a cat screech but couldn't think too much about it as the fight continued and the main villain started jeering at him. Aizawa was getting pretty set off about his quirk being called villainous. He thought he wouldn't have to deal with this sheet after becoming a pro, but here he was. He took out 3 of the villains before the main guy started swinging his steel pipe at the unconscious civilians, and he quickly jumped in front of them, pulling the pipe away with his capture scarf just as another villain kicked him hard in the chest. He lost his balance for barely 2 seconds, but that was enough time for the villain to pull the pipe free to hit him over the head with it. Next thing he knows, he has a killer headache and a strange pressure against the side of his head. When he first opened his eyes, it was hard focusing on anything before noting that 1. Someone was crouched with their face maybe a foot away from him, and 2. The weird pressure on his head was that person's hand. Another strange thing to note about this person was that their eyes were glowing, obviously indicating a quirk, and his headache had receded dramatically since waking up. The person shuffled a bit before a bright light was being shown in his eyes and he realized they were checking for a concussion. They seemed satisfied with what they saw, standing up and grabbing something off of the ground before putting on a second mask. He had to actively keep his jaw from dropping when he saw the mask. "You're Kaonashi," he said, surprised that he didn't stammer. As soon as he said their name, the vigilante disappeared onto the roof. He forced himself to focus when he heard the 2 civilians murmuring to each other. "Are you 2 okay?" he asked, taking a quick glance at the restrained villains before walking over to them. "Why yes, sir," one of them said quietly, staring at the villains worriedly. He couldn't see any physical injuries on either of them, much to his relief. "Paramedics and police are on the way, you're safe now." He sent off a quick text to Tsukachi that he'll be dropping by with news on the vigilante, to which the detective seemed pretty excited to finally have an update. He plucked at his blood-matted hair with a frown as he sat down in Tsukachi's office. "So, what happened during your patrol? You look more disheveled than normal," the detective said, pulling out Kaonashi's file. "Quirk discrimination attack that I couldn't handle on my own. I got knocked out and woke up to Kaonashi in front of me with the villains restrained. You're gonna hate what I'm about to say next." He sighed, picking up his coffee and taking a sip before continuing. "When I first woke up, my head was throbbing, and I couldn't focus my vision. But, Kaonashi had their hand against the wound on my head and their eyes and palm were glowing." Tsukachi hummed, scribbling on a blank piece of paper. "Considering the fact that you're walking and talking without any issues, you were either healed by Recovery Girl herself or Kaonashi somehow has a healing quirk on top of their 6 other potential quirks." Aizawa nodded. "Yeah, I think that the other 6 quirks listed are most likely support gear and general experience." "Did you get any more info on the vigilante? Did they talk to you?" he asked, almost desperately. "No, I said 2 words to them, and they scaled a 2-story building and disappeared. I couldn't gauge anything we didn't already know. They're short and fast, dressed in all black with a no-face mask." He could relate to the frustration showing on his friend's face. He finally met the vigilante, but didn't learn any new details aside from a healing quirk. Tsukachi sighed and turned to his computer. I'll pull up the quirk registry and we can start profiling anyone with a healing quirk. It's another step in the right direction. Healing quirks are pretty rare. Aizawa grunted, having an inkling that it isn't going to be that easy. Let me know what you find. He stood up and turned to leave. It was early, but there was no way he was finishing his shift with blood in his hair and a headache that wasn't just from the injury. See you later, Zawa. The detective replied tiredly. Don't worry, Zuku. The doctor is a very nice woman, you can tell her everything. Inko reassured her son. They were at the behavioral health center to figure out why Izuku was talking to imaginary people. Now, she wouldn't have been concerned if it was just him talking to them, but he would come home with injuries that he blamed on the scary monsters. It wasn't until he came back with a broken finger that she decided to do something about it. Talking to the psychiatrist might reveal whoever was actually hurting her son. With him being diagnosed as quirkless and being too nice for his own good, she was worried other kids or even adults would take advantage of it. He had quirk factor, but he also had the extra toe joint, which made the doctor immediately diagnose him as effectively quirkless. He wasn't very happy to be talking to a doctor, which she understood because the last time they went to a doctor was when he was told he was quirkless. Izuku had gotten dramatically better over the next couple of weeks after starting appointments with the psychiatrist, though they weren't having any luck finding who was hurting her son. He doesn't talk about the monsters anymore, isn't getting injured as often, and has even stopped complaining when she refused to give him snacks after dinner. The imaginary friend he pretended to talk to was nice, further supporting her decision. She sighed, setting her phone on the nightstand before shutting off the lamp. Things were looking up again and she was determined to show everyone that Izuku was a perfectly normal kid. A few hours later, Inko woke up to the floorboards creaking in the hallway and a quiet knock on her door. Izuku didn't usually wake up in the middle of the night, so he must have had a bad dream. She pulled herself out of bed and opened the door. "What is it, baby?" she asked, looking down at her son. "I had a nightmare," he replied, and she was slightly thrown at the odd tone in his voice. She dismissed it, knowing it was coming up on 3 a.m. and he was probably still half asleep. "Let's get you back to bed, come on." She leaned down to pick him up and bring him back to his room, then got an overwhelming feeling of dread when his eyes flashed in the dark. Izuku woke from a nightmare that ended with a scream. He was scared, the scream sounded so real and something felt wrong. He slowly slipped out from under the covers and made his way towards his door. Just as he cracked the door open and peeked out, he heard his god snarl out, "Stay in your room, Izuku." Izuku froze. He could just slightly see his mother's room from where he was, and he could see a figure blocking the entryway from his view. "What is it, Mikasama?" he asked quietly, voice wavering. The figure turned and walked across the hall, pushing his door the rest of the way and revealing his god. Long black hair that flowed like it was constantly windy, sharp features, and eyes glowing gold. "Your mother is in the underworld now." His eyes widened and he took a couple of steps away from the doorway. What? "Just as I said before," Mika replied boredly. "Her spirit is no longer attached to the living world. She's dead." He didn't understand. She was fine before, but she's a spirit now? He wasn't exactly sad that she was dead, but he would miss being able to see her every day. He hoped this would be kind of like when his friend passed away from a quirk accident. She would sometimes come by to visit him on her travels. Before he could say anything else, his god continued. "Come with me to the spirit world, Izuku, we can visit her." "Am I going to be dead, too?" he asked nervously. He still wanted to be a hero, and he can't do that as a spirit. "No. With your quirk, you can go to the spirit world without hurting yourself," he responded, taking his hand and leading him to the front door. "With your quirk, you will also be of great use to the spirit world." He chanced to look into his mother's room, partially hoping that what his god had said wasn't true. But there she was, lying on the carpet and staring blankly up at the ceiling. She didn't look injured. In fact, if her eyes were closed, he could easily assume she was just asleep. Izuku felt himself start tearing up at seeing her, stopping to look a little longer. "Mama really is dead?" he asked, stumbling when his arm was jerked forwards. "Yes. I'll take you to her in the spirit world, you can talk to her again." He released Izuku's arm so he could pull on his shoes. He wiped his eyes and followed his god outside. Would he ever see his home again? Izuku opened his eyes, squinting at the setting sun. It had been a few days since he healed Eraserhead and he noticed the hero had started picking up on where he patrolled. The Nakomata would always make sure he could avoid him, but it was a bit annoying to not have anyone to save since the hero was already taking care of it. He felt his quirk strengthen under the dusk light and stood up, getting ready to rebuild the ward around the shrine. Takeo and Kitaro lounged on the porch, watching as Izuku danced under the growing stars. He usually danced without music, since it was hard to come by in the spirit world. He found he didn't really mind it much, reciting old lyrics or humming a tune was enough for him. You know, Takeo started as Izuku walked back towards the shrine. If there was a god to rule over this shrine, you wouldn't have to set wards every day. Izuku wrinkled up his nose at the thought. Gods are way too untrustworthy and dangerous. I'd be afraid of what they would do to you guys and Sakuya-chan if I let one of them in. Sakuya fluttered down from the roof of the shrine. I agree with you on that. Gods are unpredictable. Takeo and Kitaro exchanged a skeptical glance, but Izuku was already going back into the shrine. As midnight struck, the trio headed out on patrol. The cat seemed calm, but Izuku was uneasy. The stars didn't tell of a hard night, so he knew they were at least safe, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Just as they crossed the gate that led out of the shrine, he picked up on a powerful spiritual signature close by. He alerted the Nakomata by lightly tugging on their familiar bond and they quickly returned to his side. He didn't speak, knowing that someone this strong likely wasn't a human, and he's never felt something this powerful from any normal yokai or spirit which, by order of elimination, could only mean one thing. They were dealing with a god. He pulled off his mask, preparing for a potential fight as the signature grew closer. Who are you and why are you here? He called out in Primordial, making sure the Nakomata were in his sight. It only took a moment before a figure appeared through the tree line and Izuku confirmed them to be a god and felt his hackles raise. A god coming to a shrine claimed by someone from the living world was not a good sign. Their skin shimmered like the night sky's reflection on a river, their hair was long and black, pulled into a high ponytail with bangs framing their face. They were also very tall with flowy dark robes. They raised a hand placatingly and knelt down in front of him. I am not here to cause you trouble, young one. They began, their voice reverberating around them. There was no way he'd be able to attack or even ward a god, so he forced himself to relax his position, though he was ready to bolt for it at any sign of aggression. He gave a respectful bow to the god. What are you here for, then, Kami-sama? My name is Yuzora, god of the night. They replied, straightening back up. I used to rule over this shrine before it was abandoned. I revisit every full moon and have followed your progress since you first started living here. I wish to provide my services to you and the shrine, if you would have me. Yuzora has been watching him for years and he never noticed before? If they were able to hide their presence from someone who grew up in the spirit world, they were more powerful than most of the other gods he'd met. Why were you hiding from me for so long? You came from the spirit world, I had to be sure that you would not turn out the way I have seen others in the past. He glanced down at the Nakomata, who were watching on calmly, waiting for Izuku's response. I am doing fine on my own, he said after a moment. I'm sorry, Yuzora-sama, but I have not trusted the gods since they killed my mother and kidnapped me. His apology wasn't apologetic in the least, but he was at least respectful. Yuzora dipped their head, beginning to recede into the darkness. I understand your decision, but I will be around in case you change your mind. Izuku returned the gesture. I'll be on my way now. He turned and calmly walked until he was out of view of the god before sprinting to get further into Mizudafu. He noticed that Takeo wasn't with them and stopped after climbing onto a roof, watching for the cat to join them again. It didn't take long before Takeo caught up, mentioning that he had a quick word with Yuzora before they started their usual patrol again. Yuzora wasn't there when they returned later on, but he knew they were just biding their time. He wasn't letting a god into their shrine, they never helped him before, so why should he trust them now that he was finally free? Aizawa POV. How did this vigilante keep evading any and all contact with him? He was sure he found a trend for where Kaonashi patrolled, but their stealth skills outmatched even his own. It had been a couple of weeks since their first interaction and he hadn't seen them since. Tsukachi had looked into nearby martial arts dojos and gyms for members with a similar quirk and skills to the vigilante, but he hasn't gotten any closer to finding them yet either. All of the interviews he was able to conduct with potential suspects with healing quirks all yielded a dead end. So, Kaonashi either doesn't have their quirk registered in Japan, or their quirk is more ambiguous than we initially thought. Tsukachi pondered, marking off their latest interview. Can you explain what their quirk was like, again? Aizawa took a sip of his coffee. It was just a pressure, heaviest around their palm but spread across the entire side of my head. It wasn't warm or cold, no tingling or stinging, no fatigue, the pain receded gradually, and I almost didn't notice the change. And their eyes glowed when they were healing you? He scratched the side of his head and sighed. No fatigue, meaning they were either using their own stamina to heal you or generating it from something else. I'll contact Yaoyorozu Reina and see what she can tell us. Yaoyorozu Reina was a big-time quirk analyst. She used to work for the HPSC before branching off and starting her own company with her husband, Yaoyorozu Haruto. They didn't usually work with the authorities on cases unless it was a situation that stumped everyone in the department, like Kaonashi's case. Yeah, I don't think we have much other choice at this point. Aizawa replied tiredly. Izuku POV. Can I ask you something? Takeo said as they rested on a 5-story building midway through patrol. Izuku hummed in response, laying on his back and staring up at the clouds. It never really worried him when he couldn't read the stars, but it comforting to know how busy their patrol would be. Why do you not trust the gods? You've never really explained much about your past before. Takeo appeared in his periphery as he walked closer, and he turned his head to look at him fully. Have I not? He asked, watching Takeo settle down again by his side. Well, when I was around 6, I met a god. He was nice and promised me a lot of things. He would get me snacks when my mother said no, he'd tell me what to say to the psychiatrist to make her believe I wasn't having hallucinations, and he would protect me from the yokai giving me grief. But that didn't last long before his true intentions came to light. Kitaro joined them as he told the story of his mother dying and being taken to the spirit world. His name was Amatsu Mikaboshi, he was a minor god who called himself the Dread Star of Heaven, the Chaos King. I was only ever allowed to speak in primordial tongue, and he would get angry if I didn't. He forced me to accept 4 yokai as familiars, and I doubt they wanted to become familiars in the first place. He recalled that the yokai would stay with him every second of every day. They would watch him sleep, follow him through the house, but never talk to him outside of answering his questions about the spirit world. It was lonely, to say the least. Izuku sat up and looked down at his hands. And then, he started giving me missions. He would take me to the houses of spirits that owed him some kind of debt and make me threaten them with my quirk. Did you know that I can banish spirits from the spirit world? I can send them to the living world or the underworld with no easy way back. I broke up families and didn't have the courage to defy him. He glanced over at the Nakomata with a frown, they were staring at him with something akin to sympathy. You were just a child, Izuku-san. Kitaro said gently, pushing his way onto his lap. You still are, but you've come so far. What good has my quirk done for the spirits and yokai I've met? I helped the wrong side of a war before, so many innocents died because of me. He sighed, lightly scratching behind Kitaro's ears. I guess that's why I became a vigilante after finding you guys. You didn't just find us, Takeo added, you saved our lives. If you hadn't come when you did, those teenagers very well could have killed us. Kitaro purred in agreement. You don't have to atone for actions you were forced to make. Thanks, guys. He gave them a smile before setting Kitaro down and standing up. Let's get going, we've still got another hour of patrol left. They continued on and Izuku was feeling a bit better after talking about his past. He hadn't really considered how the majority of his decisions since rejoining the living world have been because of what he did working under the trickster god. He knew he wanted to make up for what he had done, but he also felt a strong urge to help others. He couldn't just stand by and let people get away with crimes when he had the ability to stop them. Maybe he should solidify a new reason for being a vigilante? Running on shame and guilt wasn't doing him any favors, but he couldn't exactly make those feelings disappear. He sighed, smoothly gliding off the roof as the Nakomata led him through alleyways and back streets. Izuku casually walked through the gates to UA, going unnoticed by the bystanders and staff. It was mid-April and the sports festival was starting soon. He looked into buying a ticket for himself, then realized he had to input his information in order to get one and decided that UA had enough money as it was. They likely wouldn't notice a plain-looking 12-year-old by himself considering how many people were there, but he still activated his talisman earrings to be safe. He weaved his way through the crowd before finding an unclaimed seat with the perfect view. Principal Nizu's voice rang out through the speakers, welcoming the audience before introducing each of the classes as they walked onto the field. Fountain fireworks sparked to life around a small stage before Present Mike rose up on a podium in a theatrical pose. All right? He yelled out, not bothering to use the arena speakers. It's time for the player pledge. He pointed into the crowd of students with a smile and the camera pointed towards a kid with dark purple hair and an RBF who looked like he would very much like to sink into the ground and disappear. Representing the students is Amajiki Tamaki from Class 1A. Come on up here. For a moment, it didn't look like Amajiki was going to walk onto the stage until a taller blonde-haired boy nudged him gently and gave him a bright smile. He awkwardly shuffled onto stage where Present Mike pointed him towards a microphone on a stand. His speech was very short and Izuku was kind of surprised this kid was top of the class. Maybe he'd show his strengths once the actual competition happened. Our first event of the first-year stage is, a large screen scrolled through the many choices before stopping on one. A scavenger hunt. All 11 classes will participate in the hunt. A map of the arena appeared with an animation changing the layout. An array of objects have been hidden throughout the arena, which will be altered to include obstacles such as rivers, buildings, villain hideouts, and more. Only one object per student is allowed, but other students can steal your object if you aren't careful. Once you have gotten an object, return to the starting point and you are safe. He paused for a moment, smiling as silhouettes of the objects flashed on screen. Our school's selling point is freedom. As long as you stay within the arena, it doesn't matter what you do. With that, the entire arena began to warp and move, causing the students to exclaim in surprise as the landscape changed around them. It was quite impressive, watching Cementos and some of the other UA staff altering the arena in less than 10 minutes. Once it was finished, the audience had to rely on the cameras, catching different angles of the event. As soon as the buzzer rang out for the students to begin, they all ran in different directions, finding the terrain that suited them the best. Water-based quirks went for the rivers while more dexterity-based quirks ran to the buildings and a mini mountain forest area. Izuku tried his best to pay attention to all of the classes, but Class 1A kept coming into his focus. Specifically, 3 of them who seemed to be new friends and definitely top students. He was pretty glad he brought a notebook to write in. All of the first year's quirks were very unique this time around, especially compared to last year. Amajiki had some kind of food-based quirk. His blonde friend hadn't shown much of a quirk yet, but he could swear he saw his hands phasing through things. His periwinkle-haired friend had a very powerful energy-based long-ranged quirk. The entire event took around 25 minutes, with the trio being the first to return to the start, followed by the majority of Class 1A and 1B. 40 students have passed the first event. Congratulations. Nizu called out cheerily as the arena was reverted back to normal. Present Mike smiled as he faced the students. Now things are going to get interesting. Our second event is multi-team capture the flag. Students will be assigned points based on when they finish the scavenger hunt, with 40th place being worth 10 points and continues up in multiples of 10 except for first place. He pointed down at the blonde boy, Tagada Mirio, who blinked in surprise, who is worth 10 million points. It was like watching a pack of hungry wolves finding out one of them was actually a sheep. Everyone turned to stare at Tagada before Present Mike continued explaining the rules. Students will gather in teams of 2 to 4 and will be given a territory and a flag with the sum of the team's points. Your goal is to gain as many points from stealing other flags and bringing them back to your own territory as possible. You cannot purposefully hide your flag or make it unreachable to other students. Once again, quirks are allowed and encouraged for this event. You have 15 minutes to find a team. Izuku watched as the students scurried amongst each other, mainly forming groups of 4, but he saw some groups of 2 and 3. After a moment of searching, he spotted Tagada and was pleased to see he had a group of 4 already set up. It was Amajiki Tamaki and Hadu Nijire along with another 1A student named Heiayuyu. The arena was changed once again, and faux trees and boulders were set up as obstacles and hiding spots. There were 6 groups of 4, 4 groups of 3, and 2 groups of 2. Most of the students had 1 or 2 of their team members stay in their own territory to protect their flag while the others snuck into neighboring territories, but a couple of brave teams went all out and abandoned their territory in pursuit of higher point flags. The whole game lasted an hour and was filled with stealth, quirked brawls, and a lot of close calls for Tagada's team, who had the highest point value flag and was the most sought after for the first half of the game. In the end, they managed to keep their flag and even snatched and claimed an extra 2. The top 4 teams continued on, whittling down the contestant numbers to 16 by the last event. There was an intermission before the last event began. Our show-stopping finale has arrived. Present Mike yelled excitedly as the board spun. Our last game is always a 1 versus 1. This time around we have football. My, this will be a fun one. The rules were fairly simple. There was a standard ball that they could either kick or hold, interchangeably, and had to keep the ball within the field boundaries. To score a goal, they had to get the ball through a net. It was an anything-goes game, and the player had to score 5 points to win. A few of the matches were destructive enough that there had to be a short break while the staff fixed the destroyed field. Izuku was most impressed watching Amajiki's game. The number of things he could turn into was really cool, and he started theorizing what other things he could eat and whether or not they had to be specifically food. He won 5. Nijire vs Amajiki was one of the games that destroyed the field. She was highly competitive, nearly broke the goalpost, and barely lost at 4. With that, the sports festival was over. Amajiki won first place, Nijire was second, then Tagada tied with a student from 1B. He practically skipped home, giddily reviewing the notes he had written down and imagining the kinds of heroes those students would become one day. July arrived, and Izuku barely noticed turning 13, too distracted with patrols and ignoring the persistent presence of Yuzora. They hadn't tried talking to him again, but he wasn't letting his guard down even an inch. He quietly traversed Southside, following his familiar's lead to find trouble. Summer break was a hit or a miss when it came to how eventful a night it was. Tonight was going to be a dangerous one from what the stars had told him, but he couldn't tell if he was the one in danger or if someone else was yet. It was kind of like when he saved Eraserhead about 4 months back. Takeo yowled loudly just ahead and Izuku slowed to a stop on the roof, looking over the edge to assess the situation. Both Nikomata had continued on, chasing after a pair of yokai. It looked like 8 rowdy drunk men were harassing a couple of students about as old as he was. Immediately ticked off, he clocked their quirks before jumping down and taking 2 of the guys out in one move. They both collapsed to the ground and all of their buddies quickly turned to look at the commotion. Their eyes widened when they saw him, dropping into more defensive positions. "It's Kaonashi," one of them who had tusks and sparse wiry hairs all over his body muttered warily. Izuku twirled his bat and signed for them to stand down if they didn't want to get hurt. "We can't understand you, dude," another said. He appeared to have some kind of scorpion quirk, venomous tail, and pincers. He'd have to be extra careful to not get hit by that without knowing what the venom would do. He was about to just take them all out and get it over with when the tusked man rushed him. Using the old rope he carried with him, he wrapped it around the guy's wrist and pulled him off course. He crashed into a couple of the others, knocking them over, but he recovered, turning just in time to get hit across the shoulder with a bat. He grunted in pain and stumbled back, and Izuku took that opportunity to knock out the 2 that were on the ground. He used the rope once again to make 2 more smack their heads together before yanking them closer, giving them both a solid hit with his bat. 2 more with nearly identical sharp-scaled hands and elongated lizard-like faces jumped at him at the same time. He met them halfway, butting one in the stomach with the end of his bat and elbowing the other. One of them managed to cut through his hoodie, slicing about 15 centimeters down his arm before he hit them. They both stumbled back, coughing, and he was easily able to knock one of them out with the rope and the alley wall. The other retreated when he turned his attention to them, but before he could pursue, he heard a shuffle by his side, then a sharp stabbing pain in his side. Quickly turning, he realized he was now on a time limit as the scorpion quirk guy backed up, tail still raised from the strike. As if sensing the sudden spike in his anxiety, the guy sneered. "Don't worry, it won't kill you, but my paralysis will last at least an hour." "How much was this vigilante's bounty, again?" "It's over 3 million now, right?" The tusked guy laughed with glee. "Oh, we'll be living the good life after turning Kaonashi in. Jiren is so generous." The scorpion quirk was about to say something else but ended up just screeching in pain as a couple of sharp throwing knives nailed him in the shoulder. He clutched at his shoulder, but Izuku lunged forwards, pulling one of the knives free using his telekinesis and slashing up. He made contact and watched as his stinger tail flew off and down the alleyway. "UD-. I'll kill you, Beach!" he screamed, pulling the other knife out of his shoulder and jumping at Izuku, aiming to stab him in the gut. He was already starting to feel a bit lightheaded, and his limbs were getting heavier by the second. He pulled the knife out of the guy's grasp using his telekinesis, sending it clattering to the ground just as the tusk quirk ran at him again. He couldn't dodge in time and was sent sprawling. He landed heavily on his back. He tried pushing himself up, but his arms gave out as his muscles stopped responding to him. Activating his quirk, he put all of his focus on healing. He'd never tried removing a poison or venom from his system before. He wasn't even sure if it would work, but there wasn't really anything else he could do. Aizawa POV. Jumping across roofs, he headed south while keeping his focus on the alleyways and streets below him. Now that school had let out, he was able to start patrolling Southside again. He didn't patrol Southside during school because of his scheduling. He could stay out later without worrying about dealing with his students mere hours later. He'd never actually admit it, but he really liked his class this year. Sure, some of them were loud and a couple of them had enough anxiety for the whole class, but they were all strong and had the drive to become heroes. He crossed the border into Southside, taking his usual patrol route that would hit most of the hot spots he'd found throughout the years of being a pro. Most of the time they were drag deals or turf fights, but there was the occasional mugging or discrimination for one reason or another. It had only been about 5 minutes since entering Southside when he heard someone laughing gleefully, which was never a good thing to hear coming from an alleyway at 1 in the morning. He crept over to the alleyway, looking down and gauging the situation. It didn't take more than a glance to recognize Kaonashi, which was surprising enough on its own, but they were lying motionless on the ground. He was immediately concerned about the fact that they were either unconscious or... He's not going to finish that thought. 3 men who looked worse for wear approached the vigilante, 5 others were unconscious and scattered throughout the alleyway, and 2 kids were cowering at the dead end of the alleyway. Did the vigilante take on 8 guys nearly twice their size and still manage to take out 5 of them? That's a tough vigilante that definitely deserved being ranked number 1 in Japan. One of the men with a scorpion mutation planted a foot on Kaonashi's chest, leaning an elbow on his knee and looking down at them with a grin. He started monologuing about how they had been hunting for them for a long time in the hopes that they could get the bounty. He mocked the vigilante for losing over a small prick, indicating to Aizawa that they were most likely paralyzed. He had already assumed that they were awake, since it would be kind of weird for them to be talking to an unconscious person, but knowing they didn't have a broken neck or something similar was a relief. Someone with a boar-like quirk with tusks and wiry hair crouched down by Kaonashi's head. Now then, let's find out who's been taking out people left and right these past few years. He pulled off the no-face mask, revealing the black cowl and those same glowing eyes that he remembered seeing the first time he met them. They must be trying to heal their paralysis, but it didn't seem to be healing quickly enough. While he was very curious to see who was under the mask, he had kind of backed off from the idea of arresting the vigilante. They hadn't revealed any villainous intention since they started vigilantism, they were actually more heroic than some of the pros he'd met. Plus, if those 3 found out what they looked like and were released, they'd know what they looked like and would likely double their efforts on finding Kaonashi. Just as the tusked man reached to pull down the cowl, Aizawa swooped down and took the remaining 3 out with ease. They were already injured, and the scorpion quirk was missing the end of his tail, so it didn't take much to bring them down. He turned towards Kaonashi after securing them, finding them still in the same limp state as before. He clicked his alert button that would request an ambulance along with police, then slowly approached the vigilante, kneeling down next to them before gingerly propping them up against the alleyway wall. It was then that he realized just how small the vigilante was. Not just height-wise, but moving them was exceedingly easy. He also noticed the dark circles slightly visible under their eyes. It was a bit concerning, to say the least, and he couldn't help but wonder what the vigilante's civilian life was like. With how active they were, they'd need to be eating nearly double what an average adult would. But he was doubtful of that fact. A quick once-over and he zeroed in on their torn shirt sleeve. It looked wet, meaning they might have been injured other than what the paralysis would do. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" he questioned, reaching out to move the torn hoodie to the side to get a better look at the injury. His wrist was caught in a shaky grip as the vigilante's eyes glinted dangerously. He lowered his hand and leaned back with a sigh. "The paramedics are on the way, they can treat your injuries." He warily watched as the vigilante jerkily shook their head and slowly got their feet under them, leaning heavily against the alleyway wall as they stood up. Aizawa levered himself up as well, watching as Kaonashi balanced with their back against the wall and signed that they didn't need medical attention before pushing away from the wall. They barely took a full step before their knees buckled and he quickly caught them before they hit the ground. "You may have some kind of healing quirk, but at least let them check you over. You'll be free to go after that." He let the vigilante squirm away from him, this time successfully holding their own weight. They stared at him for a long moment before shrugging, glancing up at the roof behind him. He looked over as well, spotting 2 black cats crouched on the edge of the roof. He returned his attention to the vigilante a moment later only to find them gone without a trace. He had no idea how they did it so quickly. He swears he was only looking away for a second, right? Glancing back up at the roof, he saw that the cats were gone as well. He sighed and turned to take care of the unconscious guys and the 2 kids still at the end of the alley. He heard something clatter to the ground behind him and looked over, spotting a phone a meter away from him. He crouched down and picked it up, stopping in utter confusion when he realized it was his own phone. How the hell did that happen? He had to file that mystery away for later as he saw lights appear outside of the alleyway. Aizawa sighed tiredly as he trudged through the department towards Tsukachi's office a couple of hours later. It had been around a week since he'd last visited and figured it would be a good idea to give an update about Kaonashi. He opened the door and slipped inside, immediately crashing on the first chair in sight. Tsukachi looked over from his computer with a raised eyebrow. "Did you give Kaonashi our personal phone numbers?" he questioned. He blinked in confusion. "No." He pulled out his phone, surprised and even more confused when he saw multiple texts from an unknown number and Tsukachi in a new group chat. New chat, unnamed group. Unknown is online. Unknown, 3:43 a.m. Hello, this is Kaonashi. Unknown has changed Unknown's name to Kaonashi. Kaonashi, 3:45 a.m. 3 attached files. Kaonashi, 3:45 a.m. pinned location. Kaonashi, 3:46 a.m. A major drag deal is coming up, figured you two might want to know about it. Tsukachi Naomasa is online. Tsukachi, 3:58 a.m. How did you get our personal numbers? Kaonashi, 4:12 a.m. I met Eraserhead earlier tonight. He did me a solid, so I figured I'd repay that with info. Tsukachi, 4:14 a.m. Thank you for the information, Kaonashi-san. Did you get this info alone or do you have allies that assisted you? Kaonashi has gone offline. Aizawa read the texts curiously. Have you tried tracking their number yet? Yeah, it's untraceable. He replied with a sigh. Kaonashi has been a vigilante for nearly 3 years now, so they know what they're doing. What happened when you met them again? He explained the events of the night, how he suspected Kaonashi was likely homeless or impoverished based on their physique and the fact that they didn't have better quality material for their outfit. I looked away from them for barely a second and they were gone when I looked back. He pocketed his phone again, making a note to send a message later. They were completely gone without a trace. No sounds of movement of any kind. If that wasn't confusing enough, my phone was somehow taken from my pocket without me noticing. Tsukachi hummed, pulling out Kaonashi's case file. Are you suggesting a quirk or more support equipment? I've never heard of support equipment that makes you disappear like you're describing, and considering what you mentioned about their wealth status, I doubt they'd have something that advanced. He paused for a moment, considering. Have you heard the rumors about the boogeyman? The one who can give and take quirks and has hundreds of his own. He watched the detective's eyes widen and he leaned back against his chair, kind of shocked at the idea. Are you saying that Kaonashi is either connected to the boogeyman or is the boogeyman? He wrote a couple notes down in the case file when Aizawa nodded. He hasn't been heard from in years. It's been theorized that he died. Kaonashi could have gotten multiple quirks from him before he died, but I don't think that they're the boogeyman. He replied, checking the time before deciding to call it a night. Let me know what you dig up, that's pretty much everything I found out about them. I'll keep you posted. He replied and Aizawa headed home. Tsukachi pulled out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts before selecting a certain number 1 hero who might know more about All for One than he did. Kitaro purred softly, loafing on Izuku's chest as they took an afternoon nap. It was a lazy Friday in early August, just a bit too hot to do anything outside. Izuku blearily blinked his eyes open when he noted that someone with particularly strong emotions entered the shrine grounds. It wasn't very often that he could feel someone's spiritual signature like this. Please, God of this shrine, give me better days. The newcomer's quiet prayer rang through his ears. He gently moved Kitaro before standing up from the couch and peering out of the shrine window. The newcomer was a girl in her 20s and she looked exhausted. On her shoulder was a mass of darkness, signaling a yokai embedded in her spirit. He'd never banished a yokai attached to someone before, but might as well give it a shot at some point, right? Just as the girl had stood up to leave, he opened the door. Wait, he said, his voice cracking a bit at using his normal voice rather than primordial tongue. Come in, I can help you. The girl looked at him warily but accepted his invite. Who are you? She asked quietly as he motioned for her to sit down on the couch. I'll tell you my name in a minute, but first I need to get rid of the negative energy attached to you, okay? He replied, studying the yokai attached to her shoulder. She agreed, so he switched over to primordial tongue. Why are you attached to this girl? Good food, good food. The yokai hissed, tightening its hold on her. Go away. Could you please close your eyes for a moment, miss? He asked, watching her confusedly do so. He bit his thumb and wiped a smear of blood on his banishing ward, putting his focus on the yokai. It screeched and actually cut the girl's shoulder, causing her to gasp, as it dissipated into the spirit world. You should be okay now, let me grab something to treat that. He turned and quickly grabbed his first aid kit from the kitchen before returning to the girl. How are you feeling? My name is Izuku. Aina, she returned the introduction, letting him carefully treat her scratch. Whatever you did, I'm feeling so much better, thank you so much, Izuku-san. It was no trouble, Aina-san. He replied, carefully putting on a band-aid before packing up his first aid kit. Could you please do me a favor and not mention me to anyone? She seemed a bit off-put by that but agreed. As she was leaving, Izuku noticed that she left a lot more than 5 yen in the offerings box. Tsukachi POV. Yagi-kun, thanks for coming on such short notice. Tsukachi greeted, setting down a cup of tea on his desk. Yagi gave him a smile as he picked up the cup. Any time, you don't usually call for an urgent meeting with me, so I figured this was more than just planning the next game night. He nodded. I wish it was. I wanted to talk to you about All for One. All for One? Why? He seemed genuinely surprised as he sipped his tea. Well, I wanted to know if the rumor about his quirk was true, he started, taking a drink of his coffee. Is he actually able to give and take quirks? Was. Yagi corrected. I defeated him 4 years ago, as you recall. But, yes, that was his quirk. Tsukachi sighed. Izawa-kun and I are currently on the case of a vigilante rumored to have multiple quirks, and we think that they are somehow connected to All for One. I wouldn't put it past him to give others quirks to do his bidding, and now that he's dead, those people can do as they please. Yagi said thoughtfully. Do you need any help with catching the vigilante? I can ask Izawa-kun, thanks for the offer, Yagi-kun. He replied. Is it possible for someone to have received a quirk from All for One and not used it for villainy? Kaonashi hasn't shown any signs of becoming a villain since they started years ago. It's possible, yes, but you should still keep a close eye on them just to be safe. He nodded. Of course, that was always the plan. Tsukachi left the police department later that night after Yagi left, exhausted and no closer to an answer than before. He stopped by his car and glanced up at the sky. Despite it being a clear night, it still felt strangely grim. He made a note to call Aizawa later to make sure his patrol went smoothly. Izuku POV. There were yokai everywhere. They surrounded the shrine and jeered and laughed, it was pissing him off. They all worked for Amatsu Mikaboshi, the trickster god. He hadn't tried very hard to hide from Amatsu, but maybe he should have put more effort into that. His fingers were bleeding, and his sigil tattoos were burning from overuse. The ward wasn't going to hold forever and he could tell that his familiars were scared despite their brave faces. The Nakomata would fight to the death for him, and Sakuya wasn't going to leave her home behind now that she had a family. What was he supposed to do in this situation? Every time a yokai was rebounded by the ward, it grew weaker, and his headache was getting worse. Guys. Izuku said urgently, causing his familiars to turn to him. If I release you from our bond, you'll be safe. They won't go after stray yokai. He immediately felt outrage prickling from the three of them. There is no way we're letting you sacrifice yourself just to keep us safe, Izuku-san. Takeo all but snarled. Sakuya's feathers ruffled up. Yeah, this is our home, and you belong here as much as we do. Kitaro voiced his agreement and Izuku felt a warmth spark in his chest as their familiar bonds grew. Are you guys sure? He asked, noting that his headache had dramatically receded, and he felt stronger than before. The three doubled down and he avoided the torrent of emotion threatening to bubble up. Right, then let's kick some yokai butt. He stepped off the porch and onto the dirt path leading towards the torii gate, reopening the cut on his thumb and smearing blood on his warding sigil again. He snarled at the yokai, watching with satisfaction as a lot of them started backing down, giving him a death glare before returning to the spirit world. Slowly but surely, the jeers and cackles of yokai grew quieter as they retreated. Once the majority of the yokai had left, he felt his legs give out under him and he collapsed to the ground. His previous strength was dwindling, and he could tell that his familiars were just as tired. Is it over? Sakuya asked, tentatively hopping off the porch. A booming laugh sounded out through the silence, making Izuku's blood run cold. He stared in horror as an all-too-familiar figure walked through the torii gate, ignoring the ward still in place. Ah, there you are, Izuku, Amatsu drawled, looking pleased with himself. You've been gone for a pretty long time, but it's time to come home now. He bared his blood-stained teeth, forcing himself to stand up. I refuse. I'm done being your SLV and giving ammunition to the wrong side of war. Amatsu grinned without humor before raising a hand and snapping his fingers. A clawed hand shoved Izuku to the ground again, grabbing both sides of his head and forcing him to look up at the god. Amatsu crouched down in front of him. You're choosing the wrong god to become enemies with. If you aren't going to come willingly, then I'll just make you believe you want to. He tried pulling away, struggling against the yokai's hold, then yelped in pain when Amatsu stepped on his hand. You shouldn't have defied me, Izuku. He placed his palm against Izuku's forehead, immediately causing a mind-numbing chill to cloud his thoughts and vision. A searing pain quickly replaced the numbness. He couldn't hear anything but a ringing in his ears, but he was pretty sure he was screaming. He had to get away from this, had to fight back, to save his family. The trickster god was going to kill them just like he did his mother. But what could he do? It was taking all of his energy to just stay awake. He felt the strings of his familiar bonds beginning to fray, further pulling him into darkness. And then, he felt his head hit the ground. The ringing slowly receded, replaced by the sounds of some kind of fight happening in the distance. He could sense two powerful spiritual signatures, too strong to be yokai. One he could confirm was the trickster god, but the other? Someone started shoving his shoulder, trying to get him to move. He turned his head to the side and opened his eyes, seeing Takeo standing over him. Get up! Get up, Izuku-san! He yelled, still pushing him in a panic. Izuku got his arms under him and shakily levered himself up, glancing towards where the fight was happening. Much to his surprise, Yuzora was there. Not only that, but they were giving Amatsu a royal beatdown. Kitaro and Sakuya appeared at his other side, looking very concerned. The fight ended by the time he was able to fully push himself up. He suppressed the urge to bristle in defensiveness when Yuzora approached him. They knelt down in front of him, looking completely unharmed. "Are you okay?" "Why yes, thank you for protecting us when you didn't need to," he replied, wiping the dirt off of his face and arms. Yuzora nodded. "I wasn't going to stand by and watch him do that to you." He watched the god warily, wondering if they were going to demand a place in the shrine now. Instead, they helped him stand up before turning to leave. He yelped when Takeo bit him on the ankle. He stopped when Takeo stared at him expectantly, tilting his head towards the god. Wait, Yuzora-sama." The god stopped and looked around at him curiously. Well, we've been thinking. Would you want to become the god of the shrine?" he asked quietly, watching as both Nakomata nodded in agreement while Sakuya looked just as hesitant as he felt. Yuzora walked back over to him. "If that is what you wish." Izuku paused for a moment before nodding. "It wouldn't make sense to let you leave just like that after saving us." "Very well." They brushed his bangs to the side before lightly kissing his forehead. Immediately, he felt a bit overwhelmed at how powerful Yuzora was. Their spiritual signature was easily double that of Yamatsu. Their new bond settled after a moment, and Izuku glanced over at his familiars, who seemed to have relaxed substantially since the yokai first began to target them. Yuzora backed away, giving him a small bow. "Go and get some rest, I will lay my claim on the shrine grounds." Izuku returned the bow before wearily trudging back into the shrine, his familiars following close behind him. He wanted nothing more than to sleep and forget this whole thing happened. Izuku woke up groggily an indiscriminate amount of time later, tucked snugly in bed with Kitaro and Takeo on either side of his legs. He pretty quickly remembered what had happened as he felt the soft bond of Yuzora buzzing in his chest. It was strange being connected to a god again after so many years without one, but it wasn't an unpleasant feeling. He stared up at the ceiling for a minute before carefully shimmying out of bed, trying not to disturb the Nakomata. He padded through the shrine towards the lounge area, stopping in mild surprise when he noticed how different it looked. Repairs he had planned for when he had money had been fixed, the windows were clear, floors swept. He stood in the middle of the shrine staring at everything dumbly for longer than necessary. "Good evening, Izuku-kun." Yuzora's smooth voice called out from the kitchen, causing him to jump and glance around. "You've been asleep for quite a while, I took the liberty of cleaning up." "Oh, thanks," he muttered, wandering into the kitchen, finding Yuzora in the middle of fixing wiring in the wall. "What are you doing?" They gave him a small smile, finishing up tying a couple of wires together before taking a step back and pointing towards a switch next to him without saying anything else. Izuku narrowed his eyes but flipped the switch. The lights in the kitchen came on and he noticed that the fridge was running. The solar panels are functional. They noted with satisfaction. He pulled open the fridge, thoroughly impressed. "That's really cool." Yuzora watched him for a moment as he wandered around the house, switching lights on and off. "If there is anything else you would like done, I will see what I can do to help." "Okay. How bizarre. Is this what it's actually supposed to be like to have a god?" Izuku casually strolled through East Muzudafu, carrying a small bag of groceries he'd gone out for. This was one of those rare days where he left the shrine during the day and without his usual disguise. He decided that it was a good day to grab treats for his familiars, and for himself. He double-checked through his items, making sure he had something for everyone. Yuzora had been very clear that they didn't need nor want mortal things, so he reluctantly didn't buy anything for them. He turned down a side street and towards an underpass, taking a shortcut towards the shrine that was also close to where he and his mother used to live. He had considered stopping at the old house to see who was living there now but decided against it at the last second. A disembodied voice chuckled from under his feet. "You'll make a perfect skin suit for me to hide in." He didn't get more than a split second to react, whipping around to find the source of the voice, before he got hit in the face by something cold and wet. It was heavy and immediately he started suffocating as the thing tried forcing its way into his mouth and nose. His telekinesis didn't work properly on whatever it was, with it not being solid enough to get a firm hold on. "Don't worry, I'm just taking over your body," the voice said, slightly muffled to his ears. "It will be easier if you don't fight back, it will only hurt for a minute, ouch. Quit that." In the moment that he started talking again, he managed to activate his fire breath, trying to burn the thing. He didn't know how long he'd be able to keep this up for, though. He was quickly running out of breath. A loud clatter behind them startled the sludge guy and Izuku was forced to turn around with him. "It's all right now, young man," a new voice called out. Wait, he knew that voice from somewhere, didn't he? He was jostled around a moment later as the sludge guy attacked the newcomer, which didn't sound like it was successful. I am he. Whoa! The voice partially continued, getting cut off before he could finish the sentence. With what little vision he had, he noted that his fire breath managed to burst through the sludge villain, barely missing whoever was there to help him. Whoops! Izuku was about to try his fire breath again when the new voice yelled an even more familiar quote. Texas smash! A gust of wind sent them both flying, thankfully giving him the chance to gasp for breath before he hit the ground. He rolled a few times before coming to a stop, pushing himself up on an elbow and coughing until his lungs felt semi-clean. Are you okay, young man? He looked towards the voice, finally placing that this was the #1 Limelight hero, All Might. One of his big hair tufts was slightly singed. The fact that this was All Might wasn't what made him freeze, though. He stared in shock at the hero, counting not 1 spirit, but 8. How? Was that even possible? It had to be. He was looking at the proof in front of him. Sorry about getting you caught up in my villain fighting. All Might held out a hand to help him stand, which he cautiously took. The hero pulled him up like he was a paper bag, then patted his shoulder. I don't usually make mistakes like this, but I was in high spirits on my day off in a new place. He laughed jovially, but Izuku wasn't really paying attention to him. Who are you guys? He asked in the familiar guttural sound of primordial tongue. The 7 spirits he could physically see all turned to look at him in surprise. He can see us? A woman asked in confusion. That shouldn't be possible. Another of them said. He felt a tick of annoyance. Your existence shouldn't be possible. He replied. We are the vestiges of One for All. A white-haired spirit said, causing the others to look at him in shock that he'd share something like that. The vestiges? He questioned, curious. What is One for All? Well, I must get this guy to the police. Interrupted All Might, patting a couple of bottles of sludge in his pockets. Wait a minute. He reached out to stop the hero from leaving, then found himself flying hundreds of meters in the air. Well, that was one way to travel, but definitely not his preferred method. Hey! Let go of me. This level of fanaticism is too much. All Might exclaimed, trying to shove him off. Stop! If I let go, I'll die. Probably not true. He knew how to control his telekinesis to the point that he can make himself float. But he was kinda freaked out at suddenly being so high up, and the hero didn't need to know that he could use more than his fire breath. Oh, right. Not long after, they landed on a roof. Just talk to one of the people downstairs and I'm sure they'll let you out. Hang on, just shut up for a second. Izuku snapped, turning his attention to the vestiges once again. Please, explain One for All to me. One for All is a quirk and has been in existence for a very long time. I am the original wielder. My name is Yoichi. The white-haired man replied, seeming a bit amused by Izuku ignoring the hero when he tried talking again. One for All is a stockpiling quirk that creates a copy of the quirk of each user it is passed down to. He gestured to the other vestiges. Yoichi continued to tell him the shortened version of the history of All for One and One for All, how they were brothers and how All for One was their sworn enemy. Izuku blinked and refocused on All Might when a hand was waved in front of his face. Ah, there you are. Do you need medical attention, young man? Oh, that must have been the annoying buzzing sound he had been hearing when Yoichi was talking. He shook his head. No, sir. The hero looked at him a bit skeptically for a moment before coughing slightly. Right, then. He wanted to keep talking to the vestiges, but he couldn't just keep the #1 hero from doing his job. He sighed quietly, watching the hero leave with mild disappointment. He decided to just get home now, feeling annoyed all over again as he felt his chest twinge from being suffocated. Not long after he got out of the building and grabbed his grocery bag, a loud explosion caught his attention. Seriously, another villain fight? Deciding he still had time on his hands, and the noise was pretty close, he bolted for the commotion. He skidded to a stop as a large crowd of people blocked his path, all trying to get photos or videos of the attack. Who decided that getting this close to explosions was safe? Did they have a death wish? Shaking his head, he weaved his way through the crowd, barely being noticed by the bystanders. He paused at the start of the alleyway to assess the situation. It was the sludge villain again. How did he get out? Along with that, 4 heroes were surrounding the area but weren't able to do anything. Well, they could definitely react if they wanted to. The sludge villain was attacking a kid with spiky blonde hair and an explosive quirk. Cringing at the thought of having his body taken over, he decided to act quickly to free the kid. Based on the type of quirk the victim had, he would be fine if he used an all-out fire breath attack. He should be fine. Probably. Taking a deep breath, he bolted in, ignoring the people yelling at him to get away from the villain. He stopped a couple meters away, trying to figure out where to aim. And then, the villain turned his head, bulging eyes looking at him. Perfect. Just before the villain could say anything, he released the pressure building in his lungs. The crowd burst out in a ruckus of shock that he was attacking both the villain and the victim, but they just weren't thinking strategically like he was. As soon as the fire grazed the kid, more explosions went off, seemingly involuntarily. The sludge villain dropped to the ground and the kid hacked and gasped for breath. After a moment, he turned to Izuku with a glare, looking like he was still in fight or flight mode. "Why would you do that? I had it handled." He raised his eyebrows at the kid. "You didn't get hurt because of me, I knew you would be fine." "You're welcome." The kid still didn't seem satisfied and opened his mouth to reply, but Izuku heard the heroes approaching and decided he did not want to get arrested for illegal quirk use. He gave one last look at him before bolting for it, ignoring the heroes calling for him to come back. He'll leave that mess for the rude kid to handle. As soon as he stepped through the door, Takeo scrunched up his nose at him. "You smell like smoke and garbage, where did you go?" Izuku gave him a short glare, tossing him his treat. "Got attacked by a villain, thanks." Takeo immediately got more serious, straightening up. "Are you injured?" "No, but I did have an interesting conversation with All Might." "Well, one of the spirits attached to him." He replied thoughtfully, setting the rest of the groceries down. "Where is everyone else?" "We're right here." Yuzora called, walking into the room and giving him a concerned look. "Go wash up and then you can tell us everything." He nodded in agreement, heading to his room to grab a change of clothes. Geez, he really did reek of trash and smoke. It was past midnight and the Greenette found himself wandering around West Muzurafu on a patrol. Neither Yuzora nor his familiars had any new information about One for All, though Yuzora had heard of it before. He had just jumped from one roof to the next when he noticed the familiar spiritual energy of the kid he'd saved earlier that day. Why was he still out and about after just getting attacked? Deciding to check it out, he followed the spiritual signature. He spotted the kid not long later, stalking through the streets with his hands in his pockets. Was he always that angry? He followed him for a while, wondering if he should try talking to him. What was the worst that could happen? Aside from an explosion to the face, that is. Sliding off the roof, he dropped to the ground in front of the kid. He reacted exactly how he predicted, jumping back and raising his fists defensively. He pulled off his Kaonashi mask and cowl, giving the boy a smile. "No need to get so worked up, remember me? You're that kid that tried lighting me on fire." He growled, his eyes looking down at the mask uncertainly. "Who are you?" He tucked away the mask before turning and starting to walk, forcing the kid to jog to catch up. "People call me Kaonashi, I'm a vigilante." "What's your name?" "Bakugo." He replied shortly, not seeming very happy to have the company. "Why are you here?" "I was on patrol and noticed you. Figured I'd say hi." He shrugged. Bakugo, he recognized the name, but that was from his old life. "What are you doing out so late?" "The old hag was getting on my case, I needed some air." He replied shortly, trying to walk ahead of the Greenette. "Walking around by yourself despite being attacked by a villain only a few hours ago?" He questioned, wondering if Bakugo just didn't have any self-preservation or what. He whipped his head around to glare at him. "I'm not some damsel in distress. I can handle myself, so get out of here, broccoli head." He blinked, surprised at being insulted, then laughed. "Wow, okay, macho man. You haven't even thanked me for my help getting that villain away from you and now you're insulting me? Pretty mature. See you around, kid." "Don't call me kid. We're like the same age." He yelled back, watching as Izuku jumped up to a rooftop with ease. "And I already told you I didn't need help." He gave a wave as he walked away, pulling his masks back on. Yeesh, what was that guy's problem? A few months had passed since the sludge villain incident and Izuku hadn't gotten any more information on One for All or All for One. It lingered in his mind as nothing more than a curiosity. How could someone have 8 fully formed spirits basically fused to one another? He lightly kicked a small rock along the sidewalk as he pondered the answer. It was closing in on 11 p.m. and he was heading to the cyber cafe to compile the information he'd gathered about a gang in Southside. Crime rates had fallen since school let out and heroes were more active. He'd gotten a bit bored of the quiet patrols and started searching for something else to do. He started cleaning up litter around the city, helped an older man cross the sidewalk, and even got a jammed vending machine to start working again with his telekinesis. That was when he discovered a neutral zone that was fairly popular. He learned they were often called info bars, and, like the name suggested, it was an area where people could gather and exchange information. He was only there for around an hour, eavesdropping on conversations and jotting down related information on one particularly problematic gang. After he got what he needed, he immediately beelined for the cyber cafe where he usually compiled information to send to Tsukachi and Eraserhead. He sat down at one of the computers and logged into it before grabbing out his notebook. The gang, Silver Fang, had been getting increasingly aggressive towards other gangs and even civilians. He'd taken out quite a few of them fighting over small things, but they just kept coming back. The info bar gave him plenty of information about them and what their next moves were going to be. An upcoming trigger deal, plans to take over a neighborhood protected by the gang Havoc, and a list of names associated with the gang. There was some contradictory information about which neighborhood they were going to take over, one saying it was close to Westside Muzurafu and the other stating it would be Central Southside. He'd just have to make 2 different documents about that topic. If the police were able to make enough arrests and dwindle Silver Fang's numbers, the gang should hopefully calm down, and relative peace would continue in Southside. He lightly tested his sharpened canine against his thumb, scrolling through different websites to try and find pictures of some of the members he'd learned the names of. The more information he could give them, the more likely the arrests could be made. He didn't keep track of how long he'd been working on the documents for before the 15-minute closing announcement was made. He blinked in surprise, looking at the clock and seeing 2:45 a.m. looking back at him. Nearly 4 hours of work and he was maybe 10 minutes from finishing them. Rushing to finish the documents, he transferred them over to a flash drive to download onto his phone later. He logged off and gave a respectful bow to the barista before heading back to the shrine. Unnamed group. Kaonashi is online. Kaonashi, 3:26 a.m. 4 attached files. Kaonashi, 3:26 a.m. pinned location. Kaonashi, 3:27 a.m. Here's everything I could find on Silver Fang's activities. Kaonashi, 3:27 a.m. Some of the information was contradictory, so I created 2 separate documents for it. Kaonashi, 3:28 a.m. Let me know if there is any other information you would like me to gather. Kaonashi has gone offline. Detective Tsukachi is online. Detective Tsukachi, 8:33 a.m. Thank you for the information, Kaonashi-san. Can you look into potential locations for the trigger manufacturing or distribution? Kaonashi is online. Kaonashi, 9:12 a.m. I will see what I can do. Kaonashi has gone offline. Izuku blearily opened his eyes as someone poked his cheek, trying to wake him up. Takeo was nearly nose to nose with him, though he sat back once he opened his eyes. What time is it? He groaned, feeling drained. Morning time. He replied shortly. Yuzora-san wanted me to get you up to have breakfast. He pushed himself up, rubbing his eyes. Breakfast? We have food? They used whatever they could find. Said you were working really hard recently and they wanted to treat you. He replied, hopping off of his futon and flicking his tail for him to follow. The greenette yawned before standing, patting his way out of the room. Yuzora was waiting for him at the shibudai that he managed to bring back from Takoba Beach. There was a bag of chips, some fruit, and a packaged sandwich. Where'd you get this? He asked, settling down and immediately grabbing the sandwich. Yuzora gave him a smile as he started digging in. I had Kitaro-kun visit a gas station last night. He hummed, taking a bite of the sandwich. I'm already a criminal, I guess theft will just have to be added to the list. Thank you for the food, Yuzora-sama. They gave a small nod before turning. I will be in the spirit world for the next couple of weeks taking care of business. You will have to manage the shrine ward while I am gone. I will. He replied, curious about what his god had to do in the spirit world. He hadn't been in the spirit world for nearly 6 years, he'd barely thought about it, really. Maybe he should visit it again. With that, Yuzora left the shrine, leaving Izuku to finish his breakfast. Midnight came about quickly and he found himself roof-hopping with Kitaro and Takeo running ahead of him. He'd have to be extra careful to not run into Eraserhead now that classes were over for the summer. The hero always picked up more patrols during the breaks, and he always seemed to find out what Izuku's patrol route was within the first couple of days of a new route. As if summoned from just thinking about him, Takeo returned to alert him of Eraserhead's location. Sighing, he turned and headed the opposite way. He still wasn't sure if the hero would try catching him if they crossed paths, but he didn't want to risk it. His first altercation of the night was a fairly routine mugging. The mugger was taller and more muscular than normal, but he still didn't stand a chance against Izuku's skill. With a couple of evasive maneuvers and a solid hit with his bat, he managed to knock out the mugger. Turning his attention to the victim, he noted that she was hyperventilating and unable to calm down. Was this a panic attack? He didn't know what to do next. Calm her down somehow? He was supposed to distract her, right? Get her to focus on her senses or something. He stood there frozen for a moment before shaking his head and crouching down at her level. He tried signing to her, but she kept closing her eyes as she tried and failed to catch her breath. Okay, that wasn't going to work. Next plan. He pulled out a trinket he'd found at the beach earlier that day. He didn't really have a use for it, but this was the only other thing he could think of, a harmonica. When she opened her mouth again to try and take a breath, He put the harmonica against her mouth. The reaction immediately started with confusion as the harmonica played an out-of-tune note before she pulled away. What? She asked, looking down as the harmonica was pushed into her hand. Izuku mimicked playing it and motioned for her to copy. Hesitantly, she obliged, playing a couple of notes before breaking into a small smile, obviously having been startled out of her hyperventilating. Thank you. Satisfied with his quick thinking, he straightened up as sirens began approaching. Wait, you're not going to leave, are you? She said, and he could see that she was already starting to panic again. He paused, then shook his head and crouched back down in front of her. She exhaled in relief, fidgeting with the harmonica. Sorry, I know you probably have better things to do. He shrugged, listening intently as the sirens grew closer. They stayed there for a few more minutes until Izuku had to leave or he would get caught. He gave her a reassuring shoulder pat before scaling the roof. She let him go this time, knowing that the police were there as flashing lights came into view. Waiting until the police got to the alleyway, Takeo and Kitaro joined him on the edge of the roof. It's a quiet night. Takeo commented as they continued their patrol. It's been quiet recently. He replied. The heroes are more active now, so crime rates are down. What will you do if Eraserhead finds you? Kitaro asked. I've escaped him before, I'll just do it again. He said simply, jumping to another roof and watching as Takeo broke off from them again to patrol ahead. Kitaro seemed skeptical about his probability of escaping again, but he didn't say anything else. The rest of the patrol went smoothly, with him having to change directions 2 more times to avoid the hero. They returned to the shrine a bit early and Izuku set out the pet food he'd managed to buy for them. A few weeks passed along a similar vein, with the added task of warding the shrine. It wasn't particularly difficult, just a bit energy draining, so he found himself more fatigued than usual during patrols. It also didn't help that he hadn't slept in almost 3 days at that point, having spent most of his time catching up on what they would have taught him in school along with info gathering and analysis. He was pretty lucky to not have to sleep much, or he'd be dead on his feet after just one all-nighter. He could still fight just fine, considering he took out 6 gang members with combat-oriented quirks without more than a couple of bruises, but that didn't change the fact that he was a bit off his game. He was just finishing up restraining the last few gang members of the turf feud when he sensed a familiar spiritual signature. He reached up to activate his earrings, then sighed in frustration when he realized he hadn't made new ones since the last time he used them. A pair of shoes softly landed in the alleyway behind him and he whipped around, ready for a fight. Eraserhead raised a placating hand. I'm not here to capture you, I just want to talk. He stayed in his defensive position, trying to figure out a way to get away. They were in a one-way alley with the hero blocking the only exit. He could try jumping up to the roof, but he doubted the hero would let him leave that way. His only real choice was to listen to what he had to say and wait for an opening to escape. He gave a small nod for Eraserhead to continue, studying his spiritual signature and stance for any signs of malintent. There was nothing but calmness coming from the hero, and his stance was mostly relaxed. You've been a vigilante for almost 4 years now and you have shown nothing but good intentions. He started, not moving from where he was standing. You've brought crime rates down in Southside by a significant amount and I doubt that anyone here doesn't know who you are. He tilted his head slightly. What was he getting at? You're making a difference here and you should know that that doesn't go unrecognized by the authorities. If you can get your hero license and come to the station, we'll waive all of your charges. He put his hands in his pockets after a moment of silence between them, pulling out a sandwich bag that obviously had food, holding it out towards the vigilante. He paused, staring uncertainly at the bag of food. Then his stomach growled and he gave in, activating his telekinesis and pulling the bag over to himself. Eraserhead seemed surprised about him using that aspect of his quirk and he realized that he most likely didn't know what his quirk was. He'd shown them quite a few traits of his quirk so far: healing, telekinesis, his familiars, and his talismans, though he didn't think they knew about the talismans themselves, just what they did. Amused at the thought, he stuffed the bag of food into his hoodie pocket, gave a small bow, and decided to risk getting to the roof. The hero didn't make a move to go after him, though he did seem a bit disappointed that Izuku hadn't interacted more than listening to what he had to say. After running far enough away that he was sure he'd be safe, he pulled the bag back out of his pocket and opened it. There were the usual snacks in there, all of which were pre-packaged. Rice crackers, dorayaki, pretzels, and some sweets. Sitting down on the raised ledge of the roof, he pulled his legs up into a crisscross and pulled off his masks. He immediately dug in after that, saving a few rice crackers for his familiars to eat later. It wasn't much, but it was more than he would have gotten to eat that day. Summertime was always difficult on him money-wise, with most neighborhoods not needing any yard work that he would be able to do. He didn't have a lawnmower or any yard equipment aside from a snow shovel and a rake that he'd found in the shed of the shrine. He'd be more concerned about getting enough to eat during the winter anyways, with it being more dangerous due to the cold weather and increased crime rates. Kitaro and Takeo found him not long later and he offered them the rice crackers. "Where'd you get these?" Takeo asked curiously, taking the rice cracker from him. He nibbled on a dorayaki, watching as his familiars tried the snacks. "Ran into Eraserhead, he gave them to me." Kitaro looked up from where he'd been crunching on the rice cracker. "The hero? He didn't try to arrest you?" He shook his head, understanding the confusion. "No, he said that he appreciated what I was doing and that my charges would be dropped if I got my hero license. But I can't get my hero license until I'm 18, so it's going to be a while." "Well, that's good news at least. It also means that he might not try catching you again," Takeo said optimistically. "Yeah, but I'm not going to be his friend," Izuku replied, stuffing the bag with just a single rice cracker back into his pocket. "He could still turn on me and I'd rather not have them find out I'm legally dead, that would be a headache to explain." "You're slow to trust," Takeo noted, hopping onto the ledge to sit next to him. Kitaro joined them after finishing his cracker. "How can I not be? The last time I trusted someone, my mother got killed," he said shortly. He didn't think that the hero would try to kill his familiars, but he might get separated from them if he was arrested. "Just keep an open mind, the hero hasn't shown any signs of aggression, even when he was trying to catch you," Takeo replied, standing as Izuku unwound his legs and stood. "We'll see." He turned and they continued their patrol. Eraserhead hadn't even had the chance to try catching him because he'd always avoided the hero. This could just be another ploy to gain his trust and turn himself in. He couldn't take that chance, though he might take advantage of it if the hero brought him food again. Izuku POV. Yuzora returned only a day after Izuku's interaction with Eraserhead and took over most of the shrine duties once again. There had been an annual meeting between the gods, and they ended up being busier than initially expected. They noted that the problematic yokai were more active than usual, but they and a handful of other powerful gods were able to resolve the issue. Izuku had also noticed the increased activity of the yokai, with another visitor coming in with a yokai attached to him. He had invited the visitor in and performed the same banishing he did for the girl from so long ago. After that visit, the shrine's popularity began to pick up. He went from only 1 or 2 regular visitors a week to over 10. It was a bit of a shock, but Yuzora seemed happy about it. This shrine used to get nearly 100 visitors a week a few decades back. They explained, watching as a family came by and made their prayers. "It's nice to see the shrine like this again." Izuku agreed, though he was running out of talismans again from how many prayers he'd been answering. Most of the prayers and wishes were solvable with a talisman, with them usually asking for confidence or to attract more money. Around a week after Yuzora returned, someone with particularly dense energy came to the shrine. He knelt down on the prayer rug and bowed his head. "I think I'm cursed. Please, I beg for your help." His wish echoed in his mind. He had strong spiritual energy, and he could tell that many yokai were feeding off of his energy for an easy meal. He watched him take an emma, a prayer plaque, and tiredly write down his prayer. To be cured, to have the curse broken. He couldn't let him leave with just a talisman. Sliding the shrine door open, he poked his head out and saw him staring at him in surprise. He stepped out onto the porch and motioned for him to follow. He hadn't spoken anything but primordial tongue for a couple of months and didn't think his voice would agree with him if he tried at that moment. He paused for a moment before hanging his emma on the wall and turning to follow him. He brought him around the shrine towards the well. Getting him to sit down facing away from the well, he pumped the well lever until the water ran clear. He activated his quirk, putting his focus into the clean water before taking a ladle and filling it. He poured the water over his head, watching as a light film covered his spiritual energy. The purified water would have a similar effect as his ward, and the yokai should leave him alone. He grabbed the small towel that was hung on the side of the well and handed it to him. He seemed fairly confused about what just happened but accepted the towel. "Thank you, shrine keeper." He returned to the shrine after he left, taking his emma off of the wall before heading inside. "Very well done," Yuzora complimented as he placed the emma into a box by the door. "You handled that how I would have expected." He took a sip of some of the water he brought back from the well, enjoying the coolness on the hot day. "I have been a shrine keeper for 6 years now, it would be bad practice to let him leave like that." They nodded in agreement before continuing their shrine tasks. Aizawa POV. It was a Friday night, and he and Hizashi were hosting game night with some of their friends. They rotated who hosted, but it was always on Friday at 7 p.m. Tonight was Aizawa, Hizashi, Tsukachi, Namuri, and Ainen. "Oh come on, that's totally cheating." Namuri accused, taking a sip of her wine as she tossed her cards onto the table. Aizawa just smirked, amused. You can't put the blame on cheating every time you lose. She rolled her eyes, shaking her head. I can call it cheating when you've won practically the same way for the past 4 games. This game isn't just luck-based, it's strategy. He replied smoothly, sipping his sake dish. The argument continued until Hisashi dealt the cards out again and the next game started. Say, I heard you're feeding that vigilante now. Namuri brought up halfway through the game. He grunted, setting down a few cards. They were skin and bones, the one and only time I managed to get close enough. I'm assuming their civilian life isn't good. It is the job of a hero to help anyone in need, criminal or otherwise. Ainen reasoned, combating his cards with a hand of their own. Namuri hummed, seeming annoyed at the cards on the table. Yeah, that's true, I just find it funny that he's treating them like a stray cat. You gonna adopt them? He raised an eyebrow. Considering the fact that Kaonashi has been a vigilante for 4 years now, I would assume they are at least 30 years old, given the statistics of vigilante ages. Namuri laughed, setting down her hand. Maybe we can get them to teach our students a thing or two about stealth. Hisashi suggested, claiming his victory as he set his hand down. We all know our students have trouble keeping quiet sometimes. Namuri groaned as she lost yet another game, drowning herself in her wine glass. They're still a criminal, we don't know what their history is like. Aizawa shrugged. I was pretty close to vigilantism myself when I failed my first hero licensing exam, don't you remember? Tsukachi chuckled. Didn't realize you were that committed to the cause. Oh, yeah. Hisashi laughed, shuffling the cards. Sho wouldn't talk about anything but heroism back in high school. I was in a hero school, what else was I supposed to talk about? He stated blandly. He also had the nagging urge to prove himself despite having a villainous quirk, but only Hisashi really knew about what his life was like before UA. All right? Game change. Hisashi announced, grabbing a board game from on the ground next to the table. Izuku POV. Izuku continued to avoid Eraserhead for another week before deciding to test the hero. When Takeo informed him that he was nearby, Izuku turned and headed in that direction. The Nakomata twin seemed a bit confused, but followed along anyways, running ahead to find the hero. He swallowed back his nerves at purposefully seeking out Eraserhead, unsure of what the outcome could be. Was he going to go back on what he'd previously said, too impatient to wait for Izuku to get a hero license? Kitaro alerted him that he'd found the hero and Izuku turned his head in time to see the hero climbing up onto a roof a few buildings away. He crouched down to remain unseen, noting that the hero had seen Kitaro and was glancing around. Looked like he already made the connection that Izuku was nearby. He snuck around for a moment before standing straight and making his way towards the hero, stopping when he was on an adjacent building. Eraserhead didn't approach him, instead just nodding in greeting. He pulled out another bag of what he assumed was food and tossed it towards him. Izuku caught it with his telekinesis and pulled it over, putting it in his pocket before raising his hands and signing. He hoped the hero could understand sign, only one way to find out, really. Thank you for the food, but know that I will not be won over that easily. The hero shrugged. I wasn't doing it to win you over or gain your trust. He blinked, confused. He seemed to be telling the truth, so why would he be doing this, then? He signed as much, his confusion obvious. I'm a hero, I help those in need. He replied, glancing down as Takeo circled him curiously. I don't know your situation, but know that you aren't on your own. He was a bit taken aback. So, he really did know that Izuku was struggling and wanted to help. He gave a small bow before bolting, not saying anything else. It was a bit hard to think about someone wanting to help him without getting anything in return. He knew that he was giving them information about Southside without any compensation, but he still considered that returning the favor for saving his life earlier that year. He dug into the food he was given, pleased to find a packaged sandwich with a jelly pouch and another packet of pretzels. He was a bit put off about the jelly pouch. It wasn't exactly a popular snack and was mostly made of sugar. Surprisingly, this one was caffeinated, so he decided to save it for the next day. Takeo and Kitaro found him, informing him of a drag deal nearby, and he put the bag back in his pocket and resecured his masks before following his familiars towards the crime. September came and Izuku hadn't seen the hero since classes started up again almost a month ago. He also hadn't interacted in the group chat. Since providing information on Silver Fang, despite Tsukachi attempting to get his attention a few times, he just hadn't gotten any information on the trigger manufacturing. He might actually have to go to a different city to find out. It wasn't like he went off the grid or anything, he just primarily patrolled Southside, while he was fairly certain Eraserhead moved to West Muzutafu during the school year. It was a Wednesday night and he decided to head to West Muzurifu, curious about what the hero had been up to. Takeo went off to specifically find him while Kotaro chased off a pair of yokai that were following a few kids walking along the sidewalk. "I found him, it looks like he's on break," Takeo called out as he hopping over to the roof Izuku was on. He nodded for Takeo to lead the way, having to temporarily detour to guide an older lady towards the bus stop. Eraserhead came into view as he jumped across a couple of more roofs. The hero didn't notice him until he was on the same roof, glancing back to see him approaching. Izuku was fairly certain he sensed relief coming from the hero's spiritual signature. "Didn't think I'd see you again until December." He pulled out a bag of snacks he'd obviously been holding onto for him. He hesitated for a moment, then walked close enough to grab the bag before stepping back a few paces. Eraserhead wasn't bothered by the caution, though he did seem a bit pleased that Izuku had trusted him enough to approach. It wasn't that he trusted the hero, he was just sitting down and it would have been easy to flee. He considered just leaving, turning around to jump to another roof, but Eraserhead started speaking again. "You know, I'm one of the only heroes known to work with vigilantes," he commented, turning away to face the city. "If I can't arrest them, or if I learn that their motives are pure, I don't usually have a problem." Pausing, he decided to just eat where he was and listen to the hero. He settled down, still poised in a way that would make it easy to run, but enough to be able to relax a bit. "There was this vigilante I met once, around 15 years back," he said, not reacting when Izuku pulled off his masks, facing away from the hero. "He went by a couple of names, but I knew him as the Crawler at first. You might recognize him as the pro-hero Skycrawler now." He perked up slightly. He wasn't ranked very high, since he was just a sidekick, but he'd heard of the hero before. Aizawa told a couple of stories of how he eventually started working with the vigilante. It was amusing hearing the hero's tales, and he realized he'd never really interacted with humans much aside from passing conversations. He wondered what his life could have been like, had he not accepted the trickster god into his life. He'd live a normal life with normal friends, go to a normal school. But, he'd never have met his familiars or Yuzora had his life not gone the way it did. "You haven't told me much about yourself," Eraserhead said, smoothly trying to learn more about him. He bristled, putting his masks back on before turning to face the hero. "I live by myself here in Muzurifu. I became a vigilante to make up for my past." That was more than enough information for the hero. He gave a short bow before leaving. It was nice, getting to talk to another human. He didn't fully consider himself human, since he'd spent so long in the spirit world and had the quirk that he does. Not to mention that he didn't know if he had any living relatives. He knew his father had fire breathing and his mother had telekinesis, but the only reason he knew his father's quirk was because he could use the quirks of those he was blood related to. He returned to the shrine a few hours later and he curled up on his futon tiredly, ready to sleep off the fatigue of the day. Aizawa POV. "They said that they were a vigilante to make up for their past," Aizawa explained, taking a sip of coffee. Tsukachi rubbed his chin, curious. "So, Kaonashi could be a villain trying to reform, or just did some bad things that they're guilty about. I'm usually a good judge of character, and they don't give off former villain energy," he replied tiredly. "My best guess is they used to unwillingly be a gang member." He hummed. That makes sense, it would also explain their knowledge on the gangs of Southside. Aizawa wondered if he'd ever met the vigilante before. They did pop up a few months after a major police raid and near destruction of Scarlet Viper, a fairly infamous gang in Southside. "Can you look into former members of Scarlet Viper?" he asked suddenly. "Good thinking," he replied, already pulling up their database. "Though we can't rely on quirks, since we're fairly sure that they have been in contact with All for One in the past." He sighed. "This vigilante continues becoming more and more of a headache. Just keep gaining their trust, I'm sure they'll eventually open up to you," he reassured. "Besides, we're both against arresting them, but we can't do anything about dropping their charges until we know their situation." He grunted in agreement, taking another sip of coffee as he watched Tsukachi search through the members of Scarlet Viper. They'd find out who the vigilante was, they had to. Izuku POV. April, 2241. Unnamed group. Kaonashi is online. Kaonashi, 4:27 AM 6 attached files. Kaonashi, 4:27 AM 4 pinned locations. Kaonashi, 4:28 AM here is everything I could learn about trigger manufacturing and distribution. Kaonashi, 4:28 AM there are 3 major organizations responsible for the manufacturing here in Japan, namely the Shai Hasaikai, Serpent Coil, and the Iron Jackals. Kaonashi, 4:29 AM 3 of the attached documents are on the organizations, 3 are detailing major distributors. Kaonashi has gone offline. Detective Tsukachi is online. Detective Tsukachi, 9:46 a.m. I've reviewed the information. I can't tell you how grateful we are for your expertise. Eraserhead is online. Eraserhead, 9:56 a.m. We will work on raid teams for the organizations. Also, can you at least pretend you get a decent amount of sleep every night? Kaonashi is online. Kaonashi, 10:12 a.m. You're welcome. Izuku read the messages, amused by Eraserhead's comment. It had taken him nearly 6 months to gather all of that information, and another month to compress it into readable documents. He'd visited multiple cities, infiltrated at least 12 organizations, and spoke to a handful of useful informants to learn as much as he could about Trigger. It was exhausting work, but he was very proud of the finished product and, while he hoped they would keep him updated on what they did with that information, he wasn't expecting them to tell him anything. He shut off his phone and went about his morning routine. It was close to 1 a.m. when he decided to take his break. Patrol had been busy, but not overwhelmingly so. Relaxing back on his hands as his legs dangled off the edge of the roof, he stared up at the clear night sky. The stars were bright and busy tonight, all giving hints about what was to come the next day. It wasn't usually this targeted. The stars would always tell stories about what would happen that night and then expand on the next month, never fully focused on one day. His eyes followed a particularly concerning strand, all pointing directly at UA. Flashes of images and scenes flowed through his mind. Blood and destruction, the screeches of yokai and screams of people, it flooded his senses to the point of nearly being blinded and deafened by it. Something bad was coming. He felt a hand touch his shoulder and nearly jumped out of his skin. He drew the knife he'd started carrying with him and turned quickly as his vision cleared from whatever he had seen. He stopped just shy of stabbing Eraserhead in the leg. Pocketing his knife, he looked at the hero incredulously as he stood. "I could have killed you, are you crazy?" He signed angrily, still shaky from the vision. Eraserhead raised his hands and took a step back to give him space. He seemed amused by the vigilante's reaction. "I thought you already knew I was there, what's got you so distracted?" He relaxed again and looked back at the stars before replying. "Something bad is going to happen at UA tomorrow." The hero's previous amusement immediately switched to serious. "What's going on?" "A lot of villains will be involved, it will be on school grounds." He replied, unsure of how much he could tell him without revealing the fact that he saw the future. "I don't know much else aside from that." Eraserhead nodded in understanding, pulling out his usual bag of food and handing it to the vigilante. "Thank you for the information, Kaonashi-san." Izuku accepted the bag, putting it in his pocket before responding. "I wish I could tell you more. Just, be careful. I will keep you updated on what happens tomorrow," he assured, also seeming concerned about the idea that the school might get attacked. He didn't know what all would happen, but he knew that Eraser would be there, along with a lot of students. It was noon the next day and Izuku had been pacing the lounge since he woke up. The UA attack was happening today, but he didn't know what time or where at the school. "If you're worried about it, you should just go," Yuzora said after watching him turn and pace for the millionth time. "You received that vision for a reason. Most times, visions that vivid are prophecies that need to be fulfilled. I saw Eraserhead getting attacked by something terrible, the students were terrified, yokai were everywhere." He shuddered as he recalled the screams and yowls. "Then, it is your duty to go and assist," Yuzora reasoned. He glanced down as Takeo and Kitaro rubbed against his legs, looking at him expectantly. He gave a determined nod before running to his room to put on his vigilante outfit. As soon as they left the shrine, he activated his talisman earrings to make himself nearly invisible to civilians. He all but sprinted after Kitaro and Takeo as they ran towards UA. What if it was already too late? What if he couldn't get there in time and Eraserhead? No, he wasn't going to finish that thought. He pushed himself harder once UA was in sight. He was almost there, he just had to get through the doors. He skidded to a halt as the doors shut in his face. The security system was still working. He didn't have the time to admire the mechanisms of the security system, he had to get into UA as soon as possible. "Izuku-san. There's a thin spot over here, we can get in through the spirit world," Takeo yelled, already bolting with Kitaro on his heels. "Can we get past the security system through the spirit world?" he called out, starting to feel out of breath from running full speed for nearly 10 minutes. Takeo glanced back at him with an obviously look. The twins jumped through the thin spot and he was quick to follow. The familiar cold chill seeped into his bones as he passed through the portal, quickly heating back up as spiritual energy surrounded them. Feeling more energized, he continued after his familiars. They took a sharp left turn, and he sensed the other thin spot they'd been going towards. His ears popped as he reappeared in the middle of campus. Takeo called for him, and he ran after them once again. He could feel Eraserhead's spiritual signature now, and he was fairly certain Bakugo was here as well. They were getting closer. Their spiritual signatures were disturbed, meaning they were fighting. They stopped in front of a massive building and Izuku took a second to catch his breath. "They're fighting, we have to hurry," Kotaro called out, running to the front doors. Izuku tried opening the door, finding that it was locked. Huffing in frustration, he turned and climbed up to the first glass panel of the dome. Smashing the glass in with his bat wasn't working, meaning he had to use his quirk. Quickly pulling off his masks, he activated his fire breath and managed to superheat the glass until it exploded. Avoiding the still superheated window, he slipped into the building and was immediately blown away at the scene in front of him. Yokai were everywhere. Most of them concentrated around heavy fighting areas, but some were meandering around, searching for lost souls. Slightly overwhelmed by the cacophony of sound, he pulled up his sleeve before biting his thumb and smearing the blood on both of his tattoos. "It's time to go home," he yelled in primordial tongue, loud enough that it hurt his throat, while activating his quirk. The Banishing Ward and the Energy Stockpiling Tattoo worked in tandem, immediately affecting almost a full kilometer around him. The yokai screeched and protested but were forced to return to the spirit world. One problem down, now he had to find the hero. His head slightly twinged as he pulled his masks back on and continued towards a plaza-like area where the most villains were. "Takeo, Kotaro, go find the other students and lead them to the exit," he ordered, watching as the Nakomata immediately obeyed and split off from him. He pulled at the different strings of spiritual signatures around him, eventually pinpointed the one he needed to protect. He grabbed onto it and followed the string until Eraserhead came into view. He looked tired and his elbow looked as though it had been disintegrated, but he was still fighting at a ferocity he'd never seen before. He must really care about his students. The Greenette took out 2 villains before jumping to stand back to back with the hero. "Kaonashi?" he said, not surprised to find the vigilante there. "You're insane for infiltrating a hero school. You're going to explain how you got into UA after this." 5 villains attacked them at once, 3 on Eraserhead's side and 2 on his. He quickly reached behind him and grabbed onto Eraserhead's jumpsuit, activating his quirk and putting his energy into enhancing the hero's quirk. "I boosted your quirk, you can cancel the quirks of whoever you choose. Don't question how I did it right now and don't break contact with me." He spoke out loud, his voice cracking at speaking normally. Eraserhead confirmed, immediately using his newfound quirk and canceling all 5 of the villain's quirks. Izuku focused on attuning to the hero's movements, matching his spiritual energy and predicting his movements as they worked together. They took out nearly all of the 20 or so villains in the plaza before Eraserhead turned his focus on a villain that had been on the sidelines. He had severed hands covering his face and body, and Izuku could swear he'd seen him somewhere before. "You're putting all of your focus on me when I'm not the final boss," he yelled gleefully. Izuku barely had a moment to look behind them before he was backhanded and sent flying. He slowed himself using telekinesis, scrambling to get back on his feet. He turned just in time to see Eraserhead pinned to the ground with his arm twisted back. The thing holding him down was grotesque. Its spirit was an amalgam of at least 4 other spirits, painfully twisted and melded together. It was suffering and unable to do anything about it. A crack sounded and the hero yelled in pain. He couldn't stare any longer. He immediately lunged for the thing. It could kill Eraserhead if he wasn't careful. It didn't seem to react to his attack, until the hands guy yelled at the Nomo to get rid of him. It raised a fist at him, way faster than he was expecting. He barely had time to raise his arms to block when he was punched hard. He flew about 15 meters away, skidding to a stop close to the hands guy, who immediately turned towards him. He couldn't see his face, but he could tell he was sad. His vision popped back into his mind. The hands guy, dust, crumbling skin. His quirk had something to do with it. He reached for Izuku, moving too quickly to dodge. His Kaonashi mask disintegrated in a matter of seconds before Izuku grabbed his wrist, barely managing to alter his quirk as fingers closed around his throat. He seemed taken aback that his quirk wasn't working, giving Izuku just enough time to pry his hand away from his throat and trip the man. He jumped up and turned back towards where Eraserhead was. The Nomu, he thinks it was called, was coming after him again. It must still be following the same orders from earlier. Izuku focused on dodging, studying the Nomu's spiritual signature. There were definitely 4 distinct spirits melded together, very unlike what All Might's 8 spirits were like. His spirits were connected willingly, they weren't suffering or in pain. This thing was something else. He didn't know how it was still functioning, but he couldn't just leave it to continue existing. Turning part of his focus on finding thin spots in the area, he pinpointed one close to a large lake. He just had to get the Nomo to follow him. "Kill them, Nomo." The hands guy screamed in rage. They're not supposed to be in this game. Game? This was a game to him? The Nomu seemed to double its efforts to get him, nearly moving too fast for him to keep his distance. The thin spot was 20 meters away. The Nomu sideswiped him, and he couldn't tell if his arm broke just from that or not. 3 meters. He turned and grabbed onto the Nomu's fist as it hit him square in the chest. They fell through the thin spot and into the spirit world. Izuku immediately drew in as much spiritual energy as he could. Flashbacks to when he was working under the trickster god clouded his mind as he tapped into the worst part of his quirk. He had to tear the spirit out of a living thing. Tears pricked his eyes and he pushed the memories away. He was making up for his past, he couldn't dwell on it. He took hold of the 4 spirits, finding the spirit chain connecting them to the Nomu's body. With a precise strike, he broke the chain. The Nomu immediately swayed on its feet as he gently held the melded spirits. They were incomplete, unconscious aside from the suffering and fear they must have felt at the end of their lives. Whoever did this to them was a monster. He separated each of the spirits, laying them on the ground. He couldn't do anything else for them, but they were at peace here. Finally, he turned back to the Nomu and pushed it back through the thin spot with all of his strength. He landed on top of it as they both crashed to the ground in the plaza. Exhaustion began taking hold now that he could no longer draw the energy from the spirit world, but his job wasn't done. He bolted back towards Eraserhead just as All Might made his appearance and went after the hands guy. He skidded to a stop on his knees next to the hero, gingerly turning him onto his back. "You're gonna be okay, Eraser," he muttered, activating his quirk and healing his head injury to start. It took 30 seconds before the hero stirred. He tried moving an arm and bit back a cry of pain. "Don't move, stupid," he all but snarled. "Basically all of your bones are broken." "Kaonashi, where's the Nomu, where's Shigaraki?" he asked, voice strained against the pain. He glanced back to where All Might had managed to restrain the hands guy. "I killed the Nomu." Hands guy was arrested by All Might. "Killed the dash," he winced as Izuku's hand moved to the worst of the injuries, his left arm. "How?" "Just focus on healing, I'll tell you later," he replied, fatigue starting to take over his thoughts. He managed to heal the hero by about 2 weeks before his quirk gave out and he slumped over, momentarily blacking out. He came to less than a minute later, noting right away that there were heroes on nearly all sides and the Nakomata twins in front of him. Present Mike, Midnight, Snipe, Cementos, All Might, and a number of other heroes were all staring at him. Immediately feeling the threat of being surrounded, he forced himself to stand back up. "Sit back down, we'll take care of you," Eraserhead told him, almost pleading. He shook his head, regretting it as he felt dizzy. "Takeo, Kitaro, find a thin spot," he said in primordial tongue before he knelt down by the hero again, buying time as the Nakomata searched for their escape. "I did what I came here to do, I just need to rest," he said quietly, watching as one of the heroes, Present Mike, approached them and crouched down on the other side of the hero. "You don't have to do this alone," he argued, glancing over at Present Mike, who nodded in agreement. He hesitated, looking between the 2 heroes. It was tempting to let himself get taken care of for once, but Tsukaya's warnings of humans being untrustworthy eventually won in his mind. Takeo called out that he found a thin spot and Izuku stood again, noting that a few more heroes had started coming towards him when he stood. They looked guilty about trying to catch him, but they came after him anyways. He raised a hand and knocked them aside with his telekinesis, gritting his teeth as his headache grew worse. More heroes started going after him, but he was already running towards the thin spot. He managed to jump into the spirit world just before he was caught. The relief was immediate as he automatically absorbed some of the spiritual energy. He stayed in the spirit world all the way until they got back to the shrine. Once they returned to the living world, he immediately collapsed on the floor of the lounge. Yuzora and Tsukaya were by his side in an instant, concern palpable. "I'm fine, I just overused my quirk," he reassured as Yuzora pulled down his hood and mask so he could breathe easier. "I'll tell you about it after I've rested." "I'm glad you're okay," Yuzora replied, gently picking him up and taking him to his futon. "Sleep now, I will have something for you to eat later." He nodded in agreement, already starting to fall asleep. His last thought was about his Kaonashi mask. It wasn't hard to make it, but it was annoying that he had to make a new one. Aizawa POV. He watched in desperation as Kaonashi bolted for it, dodging the hero's attempts to catch him. His voice didn't match anything he was expecting to hear from the vigilante. There was no way, but he heard it for himself. "They really don't want to get caught," Hisashi commented, concerned for the vigilante. He winced as he turned to look at him. "You don't understand," he said seriously when he realized that no one else had heard Kaonashi's voice, and Hisashi looked down at him in confusion. "Kaonashi is just a kid. Aizawa POV. It was only the night after the USJ incident and he was set to be discharged from the hospital after the weekend was over. The doctors were all surprised at how far along his injuries had healed until he told them someone had used a healing quirk on him. He was still reeling at the discovery of Kaonashi being a kid. He tried to convince himself that the voice he heard was really a woman's voice, but he would always end up rejecting the idea. It was definitely a kid's voice. But, how? Just how old was the vigilante? Why did he become one? Where did he live? Was he safe? There were too many questions and no way of getting answers. Kaonashi was far too skittish. Hisashi stayed in the hospital room for nearly the entire day, only leaving to grab food or coffee. He appreciated the company, but he mainly just wanted to sleep and get back to his usual routine. It was frustrating to not have been fast enough to get away from that Nomu. He shuddered as he recalled the sound of his bones snapping, the weird screeching laugh of the Nomu. Hell, even Shigaraki made his skin crawl. He wished he could forget that entire incident. He eventually fell asleep a couple of hours after Hisashi went home to take care of the cats. He was uncomfortable, but at least sleeping made it somewhat bearable. His dreams were muddled and he would likely not remember them. Not exactly bad, but not good either. At one point throughout the night, he woke up for seemingly no reason. He was no less uncomfortable than before, and he was sure he hadn't been woken by a noise or nightmare. He scanned the room from left to right. That was when his eyes met a pair of green ones reflecting in a dark corner of the room. His mini heart attack only lasted for as long as it took to realize that it was Kaonashi. How in the hell? How long have you been there for? He asked, slightly incredulous. How did he even get into the hospital without being noticed? Kaonashi tentatively approached his bedside, giving a small shrug. I just wanted to check on you. Does that mean watching me sleep? He replied wearily, sighing when he nodded. He'd never understand the strange ways of the vigilante. He was dressed slightly differently than normal. He still had his cowl mask on, but instead of his usual hoodie he had on a plain dark t-shirt and a beanie to hide his hair. He'd never seen the vigilante in anything other than his usual outfit. The dark circles under his eyes were prominent in the low light, pointing out just how exhausted he looked. It almost rivaled how Aizawa usually looked, which was saying something. Do you want me to give you another round of healing? He asked, lightly tapping the footboard of the hospital bed and glancing towards the door as though he'd heard someone walking by. Kid, you look dead on your feet. He stated blandly. While getting an extra healing would be helpful, he didn't want the vigilante to sacrifice himself just for him to be more comfortable. He looked back over at him, blinking in confusion. I don't feel tired. Besides, he paused and Aizawa noted that he was looking at all of the bandages and casts he was in. It was my fault you got injured in the first place. I knew something was coming but I didn't explain it all. None of this was your fault. He reassured, curious about what he meant. Did he know more about the attack than he let on? Thanks to you, reinforcements were already on standby in case anything went awry. It would have taken over double the time for them to arrive had it not been for you. While he couldn't see it, he could tell the kid was frowning, unconvinced. They remained in silence for a bit and it looked like the vigilante was going to leave without saying anything else. Will it ease your conscience if you heal me again? He sighed as Kaonashi perked up and nodded. Don't overdo it like you did at the USJ. I won't. He replied, placing a hand on his leg cast. His eyes and palm began glowing and he felt the pain ease. The vigilante repeated the healing on both of his arms before Aizawa said that was enough. He immediately crashed onto one of the visitors' chairs, lightly rubbing his temple and looking even worse for wear than when Aizawa had first seen him. There was no way he could let him leave when he looked like he would collapse if he stood up again. He'd already overused his quirk once, barely a day ago, and here he was doing it again. Get some sleep, kid, I'll make sure nothing happens to you, he said, lightly testing how far the vigilante had gone with the healing process. It didn't hurt to move his arms or leg, and he had to guess he'd been healed by at least 3 weeks. That would put any normal adult out of commission if Recovery Girl had been the one who healed them. Kaonashi didn't reply, just stared at him for a moment before hesitantly pulling his legs up onto the chair and slightly turning so his side was against the back of the chair. He tucked his chin to his chest and lightly folded his arms, taking one last glance at Aizawa before shutting his eyes. Now that the vigilante was getting some rest, he could gauge the state the kid was in. He was small, he would have guessed maybe 11 or 12 had he not been a vigilante for as long as he had. The bags under his eyes and pallor of his skin made him even more convinced that he didn't really know how to take care of himself. Was he living on his own? He also noticed what looked like tattoos on his forearm, further solidifying his idea that the kid was in a gang or something. Kaonashi only slept for around an hour before stirring. He seemed wary when he first woke up but relaxed minutely when he saw that Aizawa was still awake. Think you can answer some of my questions? He asked, watching as the vigilante repositioned to be sitting more properly. He continued after receiving a nod. How old are you? He glanced to the side as though thinking for a moment. 14, I'll be 15 in a few months. And you became a vigilante at 10? He asked incredulously, to which the kid just shrugged. Alright, how did you get into the USJ? The place where the villain attack occurred? He questioned, and Aizawa grunted in confirmation. No one else can get in the way that I did. Well, that was vague. Seeing that the vigilante wasn't going to elaborate, he just moved on. How'd you get into the hospital? I have a knack for disappearing when I don't want to be seen. He replied, lifting his legs back into the chair to sit crisscross. Yeah, I'm familiar with that fact. He commented, mildly amused before switching to a more serious tone. How did you kill the Nomo? He seemed uncomfortable at the question, and Aizawa was considering dropping it when he replied. My quirk lets me do things to people, under certain circumstances. Meaning, he can do more than just heal. Did he do the opposite of healing to that thing? Had he done that in the past? Instead of bombarding him with those questions, knowing the kid would flee if he did, he went with the grain of the conversation. What can you tell me about your quirk? That would be almost impossible to explain in one night. He said, once again vaguely. Can you at least confirm how many you have? Kaonashi blinked, then huffed in amusement. Just one. Well, that answered part of his next question. Do you have any connections with All for One, the boogeyman? He tilted his head. No, but I've heard of him before, as well as his brother. His brother? He asked, diverging a bit from the interrogation out of curiosity. One for All, he has the ability to pass his own quirk down to others. I believe that All Might is the current holder. He went on to explain what he knew about the quirk. He knew there was something different about All Might, but he never would have guessed he had a multi-century-old quirk. He debated on how much information he could get from the vigilante. It was starting to look like the kid might bolt if he asked any more probing questions. Did you have any other questions? He asked after a moment of silence between them, looking as though he'd rather not say anything else. Was he making up for what happened at the USJ? He must still be blaming himself. Do you live on your own? He questioned after a bit of contemplation. The vigilante hummed. In a way. Aside from your cats and whatever other pets you have. He elaborated. He seemed to struggle a bit to answer the question, before settling on an answer. I don't live with any other humans. Well, that wasn't ominous. Kaonashi rose up from his chair. I have to get going, when will you be out of the hospital? Sunday. He replied. Kaonashi-kun, he couldn't just jump right into telling the vigilante that he can't live by himself. Be safe out there, and know that you're always welcome if you need a place to stay or a hot meal. The vigilante looked at him curiously before nodding and ducking out of his hospital room. Was that a step closer to getting the kid the help he needed? Maybe. At least he got enough answers from him to know that no charges would stick to the kid. Izuku POV. Eraserhead definitely didn't like the idea of him living on his own. But, he wasn't really alone. Sure, he didn't have any other humans at the shrine, but he still had Yuzora and his familiars. None of them were parental figures to him, but he'd been managing fine on his own. He grabbed out another pair of talisman earrings he'd brought with him, activating them just as a nurse walked into the hallway he was in. He quietly skirted around him and continued through the hallways until he got out of the hospital. It wasn't hard finding out where the hero had been taken, considering all he had to do was find his spiritual signature. It was interesting to hear the connections he and the police had made. They really did believe that he had multiple quirks. In a way, he had 3, if he was including his parents' quirks, but that was still just an extension of his own quirk. He slipped back into the shrine, stopping dead when he saw Tsukaya looking at him judgingly. You're still on bed rest, what were you doing out? I went to visit Eraserhead at the hospital. He replied, giving a nervous smile. Back to bed. She ordered, watching him the entire way as he slunk back to his room. Maybe he did have a parent somewhat, though she was only like that when he was being reckless. Aizawa POV. He tiredly trudged to homeroom on Monday morning. The doctors were able to remove most of his bandages thanks to the healing, but he still had compression bandages on his arms and chest. It wasn't that he wanted to work today, he just had to make sure his students knew he wasn't dead. Sliding the door open, a few of his more vocal students announced their surprise at his presence. I'm glad to see you're doing better, Aizawa-sensei. Ida announced loudly, bringing the other students' attention to him. I thought you would still be at the hospital. Uraraka said, looking relieved that he wasn't. Who was that shady-looking guy fighting next to you? Azui asked curiously. Had she seen the fight? She must have been in the flood zone or something. Kaminari turned to look at Azui before looking back at Aizawa. Shady-looking guy? Did another hero arrive before everyone else? Yeah, he had some kind of mask on, Karo. Looked like that pre-Quirk movie with the bathhouse. She replied thoughtfully. Tokoyami spoke up then. That must have been the #1 vigilante in Japan. I heard they live in Muzurifu. Vigilante? Kaminari exclaimed, even more curious. Aren't they like illegal heroes or something? Great. The vigilante is now a topic he would be hearing about everywhere he went. He was already concerned about the kid, it didn't help to be reminded of him every day now. The students kept discussing the vigilante, mainly centering around Tokoyami, who seemed to be very invested in vigilantism. He cleared his throat and they quickly quieted down, seeming to have forgotten he was in the room. Whether he was a vigilante or not, you have him to thank for why I am still here. He explained tiredly, pausing for a moment as the students stared at him in shock. But, that's not what we're here to talk about. The UA Sports Festival is coming up in only a few weeks. More chaos erupted in the classroom. Some asking why UA was still hosting the sports festival, others hyping each other up, and even more coming up with training plans. He flashed his quirk and they shut up again. Like I said, the sports festival is in a few weeks. He had a headache coming on from how loud his class was. He admired their dedication, but it would be nice if he could have just one homeroom that wasn't filled with energetic kids. While I did not agree with the decision, the administration chose to keep the festival on the schedule to show that our school is safer than ever despite the attack. The sports festival had always been a hot topic. Many argued that future heroes showing off their quirks on live TV for everyone to see was a terrible idea. While he agreed with most of their sentiments, there weren't many good alternatives when it came to hero scouts looking for potential interns. So, I better not catch you slacking off on your training. He turned to his usual napping spot, leaving the students to chatter for the rest of homeroom. He'd said what he needed to, now he just wanted to sleep. Izuku POV. Izuku browsed through the pet food section, trying to find the brand he usually got. He hated whenever stores moved things around. He wasn't interested in buying a different brand when the one he usually got was fine. It had been a couple of weeks since the villain attack on UA and just 1 week away from the sports festival. He was just going to sneak in like he had been doing the past few years. He pondered what the events would be this year as he headed back towards the register. As he waited in line, he saw a candy bar that Eraserhead had given him one time. He'd really liked it, and it was only 300 yen, so he decided to treat himself. The clerk rang up his items, making small talk in a cheery tone. He did his best to respond to the interaction, but he didn't really like talking to people. All right, your total today is going to be 5,200. She said chipperly. He pulled out the cash he had, counting it up and finding that he was 200 yen short. Cringing on the inside, he quietly started to ask if she could take the candy bar off of his bill. He felt someone come closer next to him as a familiar voice spoke up. I can take care of it. Swallowing nervously, he glanced over and saw Eraserhead in his civilian clothes. He looked pretty much fully healed from the villain attack aside from a scar on his cheek. No flicker of recognition was in the hero's eye, meaning he likely hadn't made the connection of who he was. Deciding not to test it, he avoided eye contact with him. Why, you don't have to, sir. He said quietly, doing his best to change his usual tone. It's no trouble. He dismissed, throwing some of his own groceries onto the conveyor belt without mentioning it. The clerk bagged up his items and passed his cloth bag and a couple of paper bags to Izuku. He turned fully towards Eraserhead and bowed respectfully. Thank you, sir. The hero raised a placating hand. Don't mention it. He grunted. So, he was pretty much the same as a hero and as a civilian. The greenette quickly but politely made his escape, only freaking out a little on the inside. Sure, he'd gotten to know the hero more and was beginning to trust him, but there was no way he'd reveal what he looked like. If he found out what he looked like, he would search databases and potentially find his profile from his old life. That would be a lot to explain, and he wasn't particularly keen about revealing his past to anyone. A quick glance at the extra groceries the hero gave him showed most of the essentials along with some sauces and skis. Geez, did he give him his entire grocery list or something? He didn't really know how to feel. No one had been that nice to him before, let alone supposed strangers. Did the hero actually secretly recognize him or something? No, he would have said something about it rather than let him go. Aizawa POV. He watched the kid leave, mildly curious. It wasn't uncommon for kids to go out shopping by themselves, but he had only gotten some cat food and a candy bar and couldn't afford it. Sounded like his family wasn't well off, and he didn't want them to go hungry just so they could feed their pets. Something about the kid seemed familiar, though. Maybe he was a UA student? He looked young enough to be in middle school, but he might have graduated early or something. Shrugging, he retreated back into the store to re-pick out the items he'd given the kid. Class 1A POV. Class 1A group chat. Tokoyami is online. Tokoyami, 9:32 AM. I would like to make a proposal. Shinso is online. Mina is online. 13 other users are online. Mina. 9:34 AM. Oh? Do tell. Tokoyami, 9:35 AM. We had spoken about the number 1 vigilante in class a couple of weeks back and I had mentioned that I was sure he lived in Muzurifu. I believe that I have found out where he lives. Hagakure, 9:35 AM. Woa. Mina, 9:35 AM. How did you find that out? Isn't he like super elusive? Shinso, 9:35 AM. I was going to ask the same thing. Zero, 9:35 AM. Are you suggesting we invade the vigilante space? Tokoyami, 9:36 AM. I saw a pair of black cats returning to a shrine last night. Zero, 9:36 AM. I'm assuming those black cats are connected to him? Tokoyami, 9:36 AM. Yes. Kaonashi is known to have a pair of black cats or an owl by his side when he goes out. Ojiro, 9:37 AM. He was at the USJ incident, right? I remember being led back to the front doors by a black cat. Uraraka, 9:37 AM. There was a black cat looking at us, too. Uraraka, 9:37 AM. But it ran off after a little bit. Shinso, 9:38 AM. I was also led to the front doors by a cat. Koda, 9:38 AM. I wonder if he has an animal quirk like me? Mina, 9:39 AM. Let's go check the shrine out. Tokoyami, 9:39 AM. I have a rule before we go. We must be respectful and give offerings to the shrine. Mina, 9:39 AM. Can do. Shinso, 9:39 AM. I should have some coins laying around somewhere. Ida, 9:40 AM. I second that. It is of utmost importance to remain respectful and follow shrine etiquette. And so, a few hours later, Class 1A was gathered at the train stop as the last few students arrived. The only students that didn't give a response on if they were coming or not were Todoroki, Bakugo, and Shoji. All right, is that everybody? Ida called out loudly. Everyone was surprised that Ida had decided to come along. They were pretty sure he just wanted to maintain order. Tokoyami led them towards Eastside Muzurifu. This is so exciting. What if we actually see him? Mina exclaimed. Hagakure clapped her hands together, agreeing. Whether we see him or not, our primary goal is to provide support to the shrine. Ida said, walking near the back of the group to keep an eye on everyone. Does everyone have their offerings? A murmur of agreement flowed through the class as everyone double-checked that they had their offerings. The shrine wasn't the fanciest they'd seen. It was small, though well-kept. On the front of the shrine was a wall with a number of wooden pegs. A table nearby had a box of blank emmas to write prayers down on along with a bottle of ink and a paintbrush. There were a couple of mats that visitors could kneel on. Closer to the front door of the shrine was a box with a lid that had a slit in it. That must be the offerings box. Uraraka pointed out, walking over to it and dropping a 5-yen coin in. Line up to give your offerings. Ida announced, shepherding the students around. They each took turns putting their offerings in the box while students that had already done so moved to the emma table or to the kneeling mats. What are you guys wishing for? Mina asked, joining Kaminari and Kirishima at the emma table. Kaminari carefully wrote on the emma. I'm asking for good luck in the sports festival. Really? Me too, Kirishima said with a laugh. Mina shook her head, amused. You guys are boring. Oh yeah, what are you wishing for then? Kaminari retorted. A girl has her secrets, she said with an ominous smile. Kirishima and Kaminari exchanged a glance. They had been there for around 15 minutes when the crinkle of a paper bag caught everyone's attention. Turning towards the front gate, the students stared in shock at a green-haired kid, who looked as though he wanted to sink into the ground. Considering he had groceries in his arms, they had to assume that he lived at the shrine. Immediately, Mina, Hagakure, Kaminari, Kirishima, Shiro, and Ida were running over to him. Do you live here? Kirishima asked with a smile. Do you know Kaonashi? Mina butted in. Does Kaonashi actually live here? Shiro said excitedly. Is your dad or brother Kaonashi? Kaminari added in. Everyone, give him space to breathe. Ida commanded, trying to pull them back as the greenette shrunk, eyes wide. He's obviously uncomfortable. Be respectful. The kid opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking between the students. A cat yowled from somewhere behind them, catching their attention. There, just off to the side of the shrine, was a pair of black cats standing and watching them all. Those are the same cats that led me back to the front doors. Ojiro said, surprised. I almost didn't believe Tokoyami-kun. By the time they looked back at the kid, he was already gone. Where'd he go? Mina asked, confused. We would have noticed him walking into the shrine, right? Kaminari said, also confused. It's your own fault that you didn't get to talk to him. Ida said tersely. If you hadn't bombarded him, I'm sure he would have answered your questions. Izuku POV. He wasn't expecting to get surrounded by kids yelling all too loudly. As soon as they looked away from him, he carefully backed up until he sensed a thin spot and was able to fall into the spirit world. It was just a matter of walking far enough to get into the shrine and he was able to set the groceries down in the kitchen. Sneaking up on a nearby window, he saw the students expressing their confusion at his disappearance. A boy with purple hair was closest to the window, lightly painting on an Emma and ignoring the chatter behind him. He sighed quietly. How did they find out that he lived here? They obviously didn't think that he was Kaonashi, but rather one of his relatives. It was reassuring to know that no one other than Eraserhead knew he was only 14, though he was sure that Tsukachi knew as well. Those two traded information like high schoolers sharing gossip. Busy day, today. Yuzora commented, watching as the students began to wrap up their visit. He shrugged. I think it was an entire class coming to visit. Those are the students from the villain attack. Takeo said. They must have seen Kitaro or I entering the shrine. Izuku frowned, turning to head back into the kitchen. Well, as long as they don't tell Eraserhead, it'll be fine. He sorted through the groceries that Eraserhead had given him. He would be able to eat like a normal person for nearly an entire week.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.